Chapter 661, Deserving of Death. The black evil energy was like an anaconda devouring elephants. It absorbed large amounts of Yin soul energy, resulting in a black hurricane to form midair. The strange energy seemed to be the ultimate weakness of the Yin specters. It swirled around in the air, dancing to the sharp screams emitted by the Yin specters around it. Yi Yun could sense the pain that the Yin specters were suffering, as well as the excitement of the evil energy that he was nurturing. The Yin specters in the Soul Tomb had been accumulated over thousands or even millions of years by Blood Moon, and today, the evil energy was like a whale opening its mouth wide to devour all of them. If Yi Yun were to bear the spiritual soul energy contained within them, he would have instantly turned into a retard. There was no one in the entire Tian Yuan world who could withstand a spiritual soul surge like it. However, the evil energy did not possess intelligence, so it was naturally not afraid of such a surge. It gathered and condensed all the Yin specter's energy, but it was unable to digest it immediately. The evil energy may be strange, but its speed of growth was not outrageous. It had used several years to absorb the masked man's Yin specter soul, and now in the Soul Tomb, there were even more powerful Yin specters, so it could not digest all of them in a short period of time. The scene of massive numbers of Yin specters being devoured entered the eyes of the reincarnators, humans, and desolate race warriors. They were alarmed watching this, but they did not know what the strange energy that Yi Yun released was. In 15 minutes, the last Yin specter was absorbed by the evil energy. With a wave of his hand, the evil energy followed Yi Yun's arm and flew into his body, sinking deep into his dantian, as it was sealed by the purple crystal. At this moment, the land began to tremble. Some of the boulders on the mountain peaks began tumbling down, crashing heavily. Oh! This scene was met by shock. The earthquake gave people the feeling that the valley was about to collapse. However, Yi Yun remained unmoved. His eyes turned to Zhulong's corpse. Inside Zhulong's body, Yi Yun could sense an indescribable, powerful energy source using the purple crystal. This energy was sealed in Zhulong's heart, but it did not merge with Zhulong's body. Zhulong's flesh and blood was wrapped around the energy source. There were blood vessels covering the surface of the energy source, receiving energy from it. But even so, the amount of energy that Zhulong could use was the tip of the iceberg. It was nothing to the energy source. After killing Zhulong, Yi Yun naturally would not forget this energy source. Pressing his hand on Zhulong's left chest, Yi Yun interfaced his spiritual energy with the purple crystal and extracted it. Pwah! A gaping, bloody hole exploded in a mixture of flesh, bones and blood on Zhulong's chest. Slowly, a drop of bloody liquid floated out of the bloody hole. Yi Yun saw that the bloody liquid was clearly the blood of gods that Zhulong had absorbed in the battle before. It was the mysterious bloody liquid that came out of the eternal whirlpool apparently. When the drop of blood landed on Yi Yun's palm, its surface tension remained, preventing it from dispersing. It was also extremely heavy, making Yi Yun feel like he was dragging a mountain in his hand. This drop of blood is fascinating. Beside Yi Yun, Lin Xintong found it unbelievable. Even the space around the drop of blood was distorted. With a few taps of her finger, tiny amounts of ice crystals froze midair, slowly gathering to form a large ice crystal that sealed the drop of blood. The drop of blood that was sealed in ice was pulsating like a heart. Keep it. This drop of blood might be useful in the future. As Lin Xintong spoke, Yi Yun nodded and put the ice-sealed blood of gods into his interspatial ring. Following that, he also took Zhulong's interspatial ring. After finishing this, Yi Yun raised his head to look at Sheiji, Xiangqi and Fengming. Against the threat of death, Fengming could no longer maintain his calm demeanor. As for Xiangqi, he subconsciously retreated as if he wanted to escape. However, he also knew that in front of Yi Yun and Lin Xintong, the possibility of escaping was null. What do you want to do? Sheiji said with her face pale, no longer having the usual air of sultriness and charm. With a slight falter, Yi Yun looked deeply at Xiangqi, who was jittering amongst the three. He suddenly said, "You can die first." As he spoke, Yi-Yun slashed out with the Pyryang broken sword. He was too fast. The distance of 100 feet was instantly traversed as he appeared in front of Xiangqi's eyes. Against the fatal blow that suffused with killing intent, Xiangqi was overwhelmed with terror. He knew that he was not Yi-Yun's match, but with life on the line, he went ballistic. He let out a heart-wrenching scream and clawed at Yi-Yun's chest. On the brink of death, he wanted to break Yi-Yun's bones and injure him even though he knew that it was impossible for him to kill Yi-Yun. Against Xiangqi's swipe, Yi-Yun twisted the blade, sharp edge always downwards, resulting in a sword beam that seemed like a waterfall that fell from heaven, as he pulled it across in one diagonal, savage slice. Pwah! Both Xiangqi's hands were severed by the sword beam, as pulsing arteries pumped blood out of his stumps. His strength was far from Yi-Yun's to begin with, and with him being injured by Zhang Xiao, he was no match for Yi-Yun at all. With another twist of his blade, Yi-Yun's sword pierced straight through Xiangqi's throat. Xiangqi's mouth gaped as it spurted out blood. However, his tonsils and vocal cords had all been severed by the Pyryang broken sword, so not a single sound came out. He slumped to the ground in a kneeling position with his back curved like a shrimp. His eyes stared wide, but he did not succumb to death immediately. To reincarnators, their souls could reincarnate when their bodies died. However, they needed to prepare a complete mystic technique array in advance to ensure that their souls would not dissipate during the reincarnation process. Once a human soul lost the protection of its body, it would become so weak that it could spontaneously evaporate. It was of course impossible for Xiangqi to reincarnate. His soul had been forcefully sealed in his corporeal body by Yi-Yun. The only fate that he had was to wait for the death of his body before he could die too. "You deserve death for all the evil deeds you have done," Yi-Yun said coldly. From the masked man's memories, Yi-Yun knew that in Xiangqi's life, he had perpetrated every conceivable heinous crime possible in every reincarnation he did. He had perverted inclinations, so his misdeeds included killing his birth parents after his reincarnation, as well as raping and killing young ladies. He killed large numbers of mortals so as to refine the materials needed for re-inspectors. In the Soul Tomb, Xiangqi had also taken every opportunity to sneak up and severely injure Zhang Xiao. He was bent on killing Zhang Xiao. Hence, amongst the three, Yi-Yun killed Xiangqi first. Seeing Xiangqi killed by Yi-Yun, Fengming and Sheiji felt chills. Their lives were now completely in the hands of Yi-Yun. "As for all of you, I can let you live if you sign a soul contract." Blood Moon's reincarnators were deserving of death, but it was just a matter of severity. However, Yi-Yun had clashed directly with Blood Moon now. He alone was not enough. He needed to form an alliance with others, including the powers of the Tian Yuan world's family clans, so he could topple Blood Moon. Chapter 662, Exiting the Soul Tomb. Sign a soul contract? When Sheiji and Fengming heard Yi-Yun's conditions, they felt bitter. Back when they forced numerous Heavenly Dao Union members to sign soul contracts, they had never expected the day of them signing soul contracts would come. When they saw the soul contract Yi-Yun produced, Sheiji and Fengming's face turned white. The soul contract was too demanding. The soul contracts that the Heavenly Blood Union members signed prevented them from attacking the Martial Alliance or disobeying orders issued by the upper echelons of the Martial Alliance. And these orders had their restrictions, at least not ones that would directly send them to their deaths. Although signing such a contract resulted in additional intangible restrictions, it was still an acceptable outcome. However, the soul contract that Yi-Yun gave Sheiji and Fengming to sign could be said to be a soul contract between master and slave. Back in the Great Empress Mystic Realm, Yi-Yun had obtained a great deal of inheritance from the Azure Yang Lord. On the second level of the God Advent Tower, there was a wide collection of books that came from the 12 Empyrean heavens. Various mystic techniques, cultivation technique, movement techniques, pill refinement techniques and desolate heaven techniques were available. The Star Transference Heaven Changing book Yi-Yun used to disguise himself came from this collection. And the soul contract that Yi Yun chose to use this time also came from the library on the God Advent Tower's second level. As the Azure Yang Lord's collection, the soul contract naturally was not easily removed. Once it was signed, the soul contract would result in Sheiji and Fengming's thoughts being monitored, preventing them from generating any thought of harming Yi Yun, or Yi Yun would be immediately notified, causing them to pay a tragic price. They were also not given any leeway to resist Yi Yun's orders. They could not even refuse an order for them to die. Such a demanding soul contract made Sheiji tremble. Once signed, she would end up as Yi Yun's female slave. Sheiji could not accept it. As a warrior, she had a sense of pride, but she was disgruntled to just die in the soul tomb that never saw the light of day. This placed her in a miserable dilemma. Yi Yun did not persuade Sheiji and Fengming any further when he saw their reactions, as he said, "I will give you only one chance. I will give you the time it takes 20 breaths to consider. After that, either you choose death or to sign the soul contract. All of you are of little value and importance to me, so I do not want to waste my breath. I just do not like being betrayed by others. As for you thinking I would use this soul contract to cause you to do some tortuous things, then you are overthinking it. All of you are not worth me going through the trouble. In the future, when my strength reaches a brand new platform, resulting in your strength becoming completely trivial, I will naturally not hold you back. I can return your freedom. The decision is yours." Furthermore, 10 breaths of time have already passed. Yi Yun spoke very quickly, causing Sheiji and Fengming's hearts to palpitate from hearing his words. They were only given the time it took 20 breaths to make such an important decision, and nearly half the time was spent with Yi Yun talking. Indeed, Yi Yun did not need to fret too much about killing them. Yi Yun only gave them the time it took 20 breaths, any more was just a waste of time and completely not worth it. As for what Yi Yun said at the end, it was not a matter of debate for Sheiji and Fengming. According to Yi Yun's growth and strength, the day of their strength becoming completely trivial was not too far away. Finally, due to the pressure that came with the threat of death, Sheiji and Fengming obediently signed the soul contract. At this moment, the tremors in the entire valley began to intensify, as large numbers of rubble rolled down the mountains. "What's the matter?" Lin Xintong asked. Many of the human and desolate race warriors were panicking. Yi Yun sensed the wanton eviline aura in the surroundings and said, "The slumbering ground of the Yi inspectors is the core of the soul tomb." Blood Moon had set up an array formation in the soul tomb, and the slumbering grounds is the array's core. When I destroyed those inspectors a while ago, I also destroyed the array's core, causing large amounts of Yin Qi to surge outwards. This caused a material change in the soul tomb. We need to quickly leave this place, because it will be bad if we awaken the guarding servants or zombie kings sleeping in here. The Blackstone Trials was organized when the Yin Qi within the soul tomb was at its weakest, during the slumbering periods of the zombie kings. Now, with the Yin Qi turning dense, the sleeping zombie kings could wake up. "Let's go!" Yi Yun waved his hand. Many of the human warriors had yet to recover. They were still in a daze from the inspectors' attempts at possessing their soul sea. Their souls had been inflicted with damage and they were extremely weak. Physical injuries were bearable to warriors, but injuries to the soul was a terrible misery. Before they were even given the chance to take a breather, or consume any pills, they had to escape. It was an arduous torment that the men and women from the large family clans had to endure. However, no one dared to grumble at this moment in time. They knew very well that any additional piece of nonsense they said might result in Yi Yun abandoning them heartlessly. If they succumbed to their injuries and could not keep up with Yi Yun, they too would be abandoned. Just thinking of the conflicts they previously had with Yi Yun, it was already good that Yi Yun did not kick them while they were down, so who would dare grumble? And at this moment, a weak voice rang in Yi Yun's ear. Take me. I do not want to stay here. This voice sounded somewhat familiar as Yi Yun turned to take a look. he saw a spiritual soul flame float out of a large soul cocoon. Yi Yun recognized it to be Gongsun Hong's spiritual soul. After Yi Yun destroyed Gongsun Hong's body with one strike, Gongsun Hong's soul had been extracted by Zhulong for safekeeping. Zhulong had planned on refining Gongsun Hong's soul into an inspector, but due to the life slip shattering, he changed his mind and fed Gongsun Hong's soul as soulful food to the inspector. Now, despite a significant portion of Gongsun Hong's soul having been devoured by the inspector, it had not completely vaporized, surprising Yi Yun. He had probably lasted this long all from a single indignant thought. Unfortunately, Gongsun Hong's remnant soul was not something that even a god could save. He could still be refined into an inspector if he had a complete soul, but now, he could not even become an inspector. As a martial arts genius, who was previously the #1 disciple in the Li Fire Sect's martial competition, he had a bright future ahead of him. He could have a lifespan of tens of thousands of years, enjoying a position of stature and power, with a bevy of concubines. However, due to his ambition, his greed of disregarding everything to climb higher caused him to end up in such a tragic state. This was actually a misery in itself. Let's go! Yi Yun ignored Gongsun Hong and gave the order. The spatial hole that opened up due to the God Advent Tower's attack still remained. The group of people followed Yi Yun and rushed towards the Soul Tomb's exterior. Yi Yun specially instructed the desolate race warriors to take care of people who had good relationships with him like Wei Chiwei and the Chu sisters. As for the others, they could only count on their own luck. During the process of them exiting the Soul Tomb, they encountered various dangers such as sneak attacks from Yin souls. Of course, they did not need to fear them when in peak condition, but now, they could only blame their own luck if they died. The paths in the Soul Tomb were like a maze, but with Yi Yun's memory, he led the group through it. There were even times when he would slash his sword to open a new path. Yi Yun walked in the very front, like the tip of a sword and indomitable. Any Yin souls or killer ghosts would be reduced to nothing in front of Yi Yun. As a large portion of the ghostly beings were dealt with by Yi Yun, it alleviated the pressure on the people behind. If not, with the Heavenly Blood Union members being so weak, the death count would probably have surged. In such a fashion, Yi Yun led the group of people for a total of 4 hours. With a final slash of his sword, he cleaved at a spatial barrier that was not considered too firm. As a ray of sunshine tore through the hole in the spatial barrier, it illuminated the faces of everyone. Although it was a weak ray of sunshine, it undoubtedly was a sign of the warm sun from the outside world. Many people even had the urge to tear up. They were finally out. The group rushed out through the spatial barrier desperately. They touched the rough stony cliffs of the outside world. Despite there being just a trace of warmth from the sunshine that barely illuminated the dark skies, and it being the extremely cold far north, a sense of longing surged in the hearts of many. The expedition into the Soul Tomb was too repressing and tortuous. All of them had believed that they would be buried in that land of death. Even when they saw the outside world, they still found it unreal. They had a feeling like they were given a second shot at life. They had finally survived. Many of their companions had turned to bones in the Soul Tomb. There were no opportunities or rewards for the Blackstone trials. There was no ladder to heaven that allowed them to ascend, it was only a trap and death. The only reason they survived was not due to their strength, but because of their good luck. Those who lacked luck had turned to ashes in the Soul Tomb, along with their ambition. Chapter 663, No Room for Regret. Deep in the untraversable sea, 7 demon mountains. For thousands of years, endless amounts of starlight had carved the edges of 7 demon mountains. Despite the waves crashing repeatedly into the rifts, 7 demon mountains still remained erect. Their existence was extremely mysterious. Over the annals of history, there were imperial kings in the Tian Yuan world who wished to probe the deep depths of the untraversable sea to figure out its secrets. However, when they passed by, they failed to discover 7 demon mountains. Even if they saw them, they would not be able to tell anything special about these black rocks. However, 7 demon mountains were extremely unusual today. The untraversable sea in a 5,000-mile radius around 7 demon mountains, which should have been light red in color, had now turned deep blue. Looking into the distance, the untraversable sea was a boundless expanse of blue water. However, floating above the deep blue water surface, there was a gigantic array. What seemed like the supposed redness in the seawater was coagulated in the array, causing every runic pattern of the array to look extremely red. Right in the middle of the circular array was 7 demon mountains. To be accurate, the center was the middle mountain of 7 demon mountains, a black-armored demon god. At this moment, the starlight swarmed down from the heavens, illuminating this demon mountain. This allowed people to vaguely make out the phantom image of a tall man sealed in the demon mountain. This man was like a mountain peak himself. He wore ancient black armor and he held a black lance. A bundle of long hair was tied up in his helmet, and his eyes looked as bright as lighthouses in the sea. As the array flickered, it absorbed the heaven-earth yuan qi from its surroundings, sealing this mountain. The black-armored man had a stern expression, but he remained motionless. Despite standing there, he caused people to shudder right to their very souls. Not far from the red array stood the reincarnators, and upper echelons of Blood Moon. One of them was the person with executive control over Blood Moon, the current Martial Alliance leader. He was now wearing a black long robe, and his feet were stepping on the large array's blood runes. The star-shaped scar in the middle of his eyebrows was shimmering again and again. He was controlling the array, trying to wear down the black-armored man's final consciousness. For tens of thousands of years, he had been doing this. Back then, when the Azure Yang Lord established the 7 seals to seal the 7 demon disciples, his goal was to use the endless passage of time to slowly wear the 7 demon disciples' consciousnesses away. However, the 7 demon disciples were too powerful. It probably needed an additional period of time amounting to tens of millions of years for their consciousness to completely disappear. However, the Martial Alliance leader could no longer wait any further. This matter was of utmost importance, so he was fully focused. However, beside him, the other reincarnators faced the black-armored demon god with flustered expressions and uncertainty. They were afraid. Even though the demon disciple was sealed, just facing him struck fear in their hearts. "Why are you panicking?" the Alliance leader coldly bellowed. No matter how strong the black-armored demon god is, he has already been sealed for tens of millions of years. Furthermore, it is a seal created by Jian Xingyang. This seal can wear spiritual souls and consciousness down. Just sealing a Tian Yuan world warrior for a few years would be enough to reduce him into a walking zombie. The black-armored demon god's spiritual soul is ancient, allowing him to endure the effacing caused by the seal, but it is extremely contrived. Over the long periods of time, his spiritual soul's strength has been constantly weakening. Now, his aura may be powerful, but the amount of consciousness he possesses can nearly be neglected. The Alliance leader would meticulously check on the black-armored demon god's consciousness every incarnation he had. His consciousness had clearly weakened a bit every 10,000 years. And in the world-shaking battle tens of millions of years ago, the black-armored demon god had been stabbed in the heart directly by the Azure Yang Lord. This sword had inflicted an extremely serious injury on the black-armored demon god. Despite so much time having passed, that sword wound remained on the black-armored demon god's chest. There was even a sword gash on his chest armor. After being reprimanded by the Alliance leader, the reincarnators forcefully calmed their nerves and carried on contributing their strength to maintain the array. The bright red array was like a gigantic miller which was grinding away the black-armored demon god's consciousness bit by bit. However, it was going too slow. If a primordial desolate beast, which was in deep slumber, was stabbed in the heart, it might be instantly killed. But if a wound was inflicted on it, slowly letting it bleed itself away, it might still eventually wake up in a weakened state. Lord Sacred Ambassador, it has been a while since Zhulong's trip to the Soul Tomb happened. According to our plans, he should have awakened all the inspectors in the Soul Tomb yesterday. He should have arrived in the untraversable sea today through a teleportation array, but up to now, there has been no news from him. These reincarnators lacked the confidence, mainly due to the disappearance of Zhulong. Upon hearing the inquiries from the reincarnators, the Alliance leader's expression turned sullen. With both of them being first-generation Blood Moon, the Alliance leader and Zhulong had a mysterious mental connection, and now, that mental connection was becoming weaker and weaker. There were only two possibilities for such a situation to occur. The first reason would be Zhulong abandoning his present body and beginning his next reincarnation. The second reason would be Zhulong had been killed. With the situation at hand, the Alliance leader refused to believe that Zhulong would choose to reincarnate at such a critical moment. Furthermore, it was not that simple to reincarnate. It required a lot of preparation, and Zhulong reaching a sufficiently high cultivation level. Then the only possibility was the second one. Zhulong had been killed. Just thinking of this possibility made the Alliance leader feel a wrench in his heart. Killed. As first-generation Blood Moon, Zhulong was one of the backbone of Blood Moon's organization. The Alliance leader also had a brotherly affection with Zhulong. Now, Zhulong had been killed. Who could kill Zhulong despite all the array protections in the Soul Tomb? The Alliance leader could not figure it out. He knew Zhulong's strength very well. Although the desolate race's Jiang Xiao had a peerless bloodline, her strength was mainly on the control of desolate beasts, so she was definitely no match for Zhulong. It had to be someone else who had killed Zhulong. Who could it be? The Alliance leader was vexed. All his machinations were now in a perilous state with Zhulong's death and the failure of the Inspector army to appear. The black-armored demon god temporarily sealed in the array would definitely be revived. It was impossible to prevent it. The Alliance leader's plan was to use the array set up by the Azure Yang Lord and tens of millions of years, along with the Inspector army's soul-devouring abilities to wipe out the black-armored demon god's consciousness. After that, the Alliance leader would then carry out his final reincarnation under the guard of the other reincarnators and Zhulong. By abandoning his original body to undergo a reincarnation, he would take over the black-armored demon god's body. To reincarnators, the strongest thing was their souls. After numerous reincarnations, the potential of their souls had been expended. As for their bodies, they would obtain a new one every time. They were fated to abandon their old bodies after every reincarnation, so they did not put too much effort into tempering their bodies, so it was not a heart-wrenching event to abandon their bodies in every incarnation. And the new body the Alliance leader would obtain was the black-armored demon god's. With powerful life force, not only could it extend his overall lifespan that had been shortened from his repeated reincarnation, it would also result in a quantum leap in his strength. That reincarnation would be more similar to possession. However, it was a special possession that combined the usage of the Heavenly Tao reincarnation grand technique. But now, Zhulong was dead. Instantly, the Alliance leader experienced immense pressure. He had already made the first step, and there was already no room for regret. Once the black-armored demon god awoke with a tinge of consciousness, it would be able to sense what the Alliance leader had been doing over the tens of millions of years. And his outcome would be obvious. He would not be able to hide because just as he had a mental connection with Zhulong, the black-armored demon god, who created Blood Moon, also had a mental connection with the Alliance leader. With the mental connection, he would be able to find him, and the outcome would be death. He could no longer turn back. However, without the Inspector's aid, how was he to wipe away the final consciousness the black-armored demon god had with the array he had? Chapter 664, Greed. At this moment, in the land of the far north, outside the Soul Tomb, the dim sun hung high in the sky. All the Heavenly Blood Union members who had escaped death were rejoicing over their escape from the Soul Tomb. They were pigs reared to be slaughtered by the Heavenly Blood Union. The so-called Blackstone trials were actually just sending them to the slaughtering grounds to be slaughtered. They were destined to die, but now they had survived all because of Yi Yun. Instantly, Yi Yun became the focus of attention of all the Heavenly Blood Union members. Furthermore, his strength was so powerful that there was no way to stop his momentous rise. He was bound to soar high in the future, becoming a figure that could rival the peerless Great Empress. Just thinking of Yi Yun's future gave many people some ideas. Although befriending Yi Yun at this moment was unlikely to get him to aid them in the future, it would at least prevent any grudge or animosity with him. Young Master Yi, no words can adequately express my gratitude for your help. It will be remembered by me, Sun Li. Young Master Yi, this lowly one is named Nanjian Ping, from the Nanjian family and also the inheritor of the Nanjian family. Although this lowly one lacks strength, some say in the south still exists. In the future, if young Master Yi requires someone to do some menial chores, feel free to use this lowly one. After many of them recovered a bit physically and the pain from their soul soothed, they began expressing their good-willed intentions towards Yi Yun. Yi Yun scanned these people. He could tell that some of them were truly grateful. Most of the elites present were not evil by nature. They naturally had jealous and selfish emotions, but that was what it was to be human. The animosity towards Yi Yun in the past was mainly due to the propaganda spread by the Martial Alliance. However, there was a tiny minority who thanked Yi Yun unsincerely. However, Yi Yun did not mind this. He said, "All of you are to return to your factions as soon as possible. Work separately and use teleportation arrays to achieve the fastest speed possible. Those who know how to disguise yourself, do so. Try to choose routes with the fewest people and do not let others discover you. I cannot guarantee that Blood Moon would not chase after you to silence you, so it's best to err on the side of caution. It is wise to contact your factions now and tell them of what had happened, so that they can send people to receive you." Yi Yun's words reminded the bunch of geniuses. Yes, previously they were not worried since there was no way to transmit any information out of the Soul Tomb. But now, Blood Moon had probably received the news and wanted to silence them. It was not difficult for them to contact their factions the moment they were out of the Soul Tomb. Many of the Heavenly Blood Union members were elites of their respective factions. To avoid any unexpected circumstances, they had special means of contacting their respective factions. At this moment, they took out their precious voice transmission charms or jade slips, in preparation to contact their factions over distances that span tens of millions of miles. "Young Master Yi, you aren't a human traitor, right? Also, what is Blood Moon plotting?" A Heavenly Blood Union member who wanted to transmit his voice asked Yi Yun. He wanted to construct what he wanted to send using the voice transmission jade slip, according to Yi Yun's response. Yi Yun looked at Jiang Shiro, who was beside him, and whispered, "Sis Shiro, why don't you do it?" As the Desolate Race's new Desolate Queen, it was most suitable for Jiang Shiro to explain the situation. Previously, Jiang Shiro did not mention a single word of Blood Moon's scheme because it was pointless. No one would believe her. But now, everything was different. "All right." Jiang Shiro nodded. She no longer looked as resolute and lonely back when she was teetering on the brink between life and death. Instead, she had the cuteness and ruddiness of a young lady in her prime. Due to Yi Yun's return, and her bringing the Desolate Race's Skyfox back safely, she was completely filled with happiness. "Then, let me explain everything to everyone." Jiang Shiro's words were short and simple. Soon, she explained everything that had happened. When she mentioned how Blood Moon had destroyed large amounts of historical records tens of millions of years ago, concealing what had happened back then as well as large amounts of inheritance, the Heavenly Blood Union members present were immediately stunned with disbelief. Even though they now knew that Blood Moon was evil, they found it difficult to believe the historical events that happened tens of millions of years ago. They found it difficult to accept that the animosity that separated the two races was due to such a reason that reversed all preconceptions they possessed. Is this true? It is your choice to believe. I have finished explaining and you should leave. Return to your respective factions, and try to convince your elders and grand elders. By gathering the Tian Yuan world's forces, it should not be difficult to topple Blood Moon. Besides, you might not know that the treasury established by Blood Moon in the Heavenly Tao Union is just a tiny portion of its inheritance. Tens of millions of years ago, the Tian Yuan world's martial civilization was nearly destroyed in that huge war. Blood Moon back then was even more powerful than it is now. There were elite members of Blood Moon that had been lost during the war. However, their elites may be dead, but the accumulated wealth they have still remains. Inheritance, pills, relics, etc. Tens of millions of years ago, it was an era of destruction. Many large factions were vanquished, and quite a large portion of the accumulated wealth of these vanquished factions fell into the hands of Blood Moon. If that was not the case, how do you think the Blood Moon has so much wealth to offer you as rewards, or the gifts to the various factions in the Tian Yuan world, so as to buy them over? Zhang Xiaorou's words were extremely thought-provoking and tempting. By saying it this way, many people's eyes lit up. Yes. The Martial Alliance's foundation was unimaginably deep. Although the Martial Alliance was always a large faction, people did not find it much more powerful than factions like the Li Fire sect, Shintu family clan, or the Lin family. It was only 7 years ago when the Martial Alliance suddenly rose up did they impress on people its immense strength. And if one thought carefully, a great deal of power it seemed to possess was a result of their riches, while the remaining reason boiled down to the Martial Alliance's core experts that numbered 1 or 2. It was because the Martial Alliance had great heritage that made people feel that they were powerful. And when they analyzed the Martial Alliance's strength, other than the Martial Alliance's alliance leader and his right and left-hand men, the other members of the upper echelons of the Martial Alliance were not much more powerful than their faction's grand elders. Then how could such a faction without ridiculous power obtain so much wealth and ancient inheritance? Especially with things like the Heavenly Tao Reincarnation Grand Technique and longevity extending pills, it completely exceeded the martial civilization the Tian Yuan world currently had. Probably only Zhang Xiaorou's explanation of the Martial Alliance robbing everything from ancient times made sense. That was immense amounts of wealth and ancient inheritance. If they obtained it. Just thinking of this made them extremely excited. If they could freely pick from a large treasury that had collected large amounts of ancient martial inheritance and wealth accumulated over tens of millions of years, what sort of scene would that be? A youth in his 20s immediately shouted fervently, "Fairy Jiang is right. Blood Moon's wealth is nothing but ill-gotten gains obtained by robbing the Tian Yuan world. We should eradicate Blood Moon and take back the riches. All of that should be reasonably used so as to push the Tian Yuan world's martial frontier to the next stage." That's right, to think Blood Moon controlled the Martial Alliance to make a fool of us. It has to be eradicated. The treasures it has robbed should be returned to everyone. When that happens, the Tian Yuan world would welcome a new martial golden age. Many Heavenly Blood Union members echoed. Their voices even seemed to have a tone of righteousness. However, Yi knew very well that this was the greed in their hearts. The Martial Alliance was originally an orthodox organization. With it being powerful and mysterious, no one dared to covet thoughts against it. Even if they had such thoughts, it was very difficult to get the rest of the Tian Yuan world to cooperate with them. However, things were different now, considering how it was advantageous to shove a falling wall. The present Heavenly Blood Union members could not determine the veracity of Zhang Xiaorou's words, but it was already established that Blood Moon was evil. It was natural to eradicate evil. Furthermore, the evil faction contained immense riches. Although it was mentioned as returning the riches to everyone, who didn't want to possess all of it for themselves? Zhang Xiaorou was using the greed in their hearts to divert their attention from the doubts towards her words to the hatred for Blood Moon. This agitation clearly was very effective. As the saying goes, a man's wealth is his own ruin by causing greed in others. Furthermore, Blood Moon itself was at fault. We cannot delay matters. Let us go. We should act separately. Transmit the information as we go, so that all the respective factions would appear in force. They can attack Blood Moon and receive us at the same time. My family clan is beside Heaven Martial City. I might as well get my family clan to activate the family's elites to attack Heaven Marshal City, preventing Blood Moon from having time to target us." As these elites spoke, they bade farewell to Yi Yun and Jiang Xiao, flying off in all directions. As they flew, they crushed their voice transmission charms or jade slips. Rainbow beams of light shot out, transmitting all sorts of information within. Chapter 665, Besieging the Martial Alliance. In the past decade, various large factions had subconsciously accepted the Martial Alliance as the leading faction in the Tian Yuan world. After all, the Martial Alliance possessed items they coveted. Be it the longevity-extending pills or their ancient inheritance, they made the factions, that posed as ancient entities, turn red with envy. Under such circumstances, there was nothing to doubt about the Martial Alliance's authority. People also accepted the reason the Martial Alliance gave for its rise in power. They believed that the Martial Alliance was going to lead the Tian Yuan world to tide over the coming calamity, as well as allow the Tian Yuan world's martial civilization to return to the glory days of ancient times. And today, many factions were still considering what gifts they should send the Martial Alliance during a Tian Yuan World Martial Tea session, organized by the Martial Alliance a month later. However, suddenly they received the voice transmission jade slips from their respective juniors. These long-distance voice transmission jade slips were extremely costly to produce, so it was not something to be used frivolously, unless in an emergency. The various large factions treated the jade slips' content very seriously, so when they finished hearing it, they were completely stunned. The descriptions regarding the Martial Alliance and the jade slips alarmed them greatly. There were even many Heavenly Blood Union members who directly suggested that their family clans should ally with nearby factions so as to attack the Martial Alliance. As long as the Tian Yuan world's factions allied, the Martial Alliance would be no match. Of course, the attack on the Martial Alliance had to be done at lightning speed. If not, the other factions could attack the Martial Alliance first, preventing them from obtaining the treasures hidden in the Martial Alliance. Besiege the Martial Alliance? Rob the Martial Alliance of all their resources and riches? The Jade Slips information was just too shocking, so much that even though it was news transmitted by their own juniors, many members of the upper echelons of these large factions could not immediately accept the content within. Many factions chose to first monitor the situation. They secretly contacted other factions that they were friendly with, and after probing, they learned a fact. All the Heavenly Blood Union members had transmitted the same information to their own factions. They had indeed been plotted against by Blood Moon. As it was a matter of great importance, many large factions, who were friendly with each other, began to act. They gathered together, discussing the storm that was about to happen. In history, there had been super factions that managed to dominate the world, but due to various reasons, they would be besieged at their peak, causing them to crumble overnight. And compared to the large factions that had appeared and perished in history, the Martial Alliance did not seem that much stronger. 2 days later, the factions that were further north had received their Heavenly Tao Union disciples. These people had put on disguises and used teleportation arrays to rush back, day and night without stop. When they described it in person, the information provided became even clearer than the content in the Jade Slips. With more than 100 Heavenly Blood Union members confirming this matter unanimously, it definitely could not be fake. However, the large factions of the Tian Yuan world refused to easily believe in the descriptions the Desolate Race provided. The idea of division between us and them was irreconcilable, entrenched within their hearts. They could temporarily ignore the Desolate Race. Furthermore, they did not need to consider cooperating with them. Many of the Tian Yuan world factions were planning on annexing the Martial Alliance. Once such an ancient existence was destroyed, it was unknown how many treasures they would leave behind, so it was enough for them to rise up against them. Factions began to secretly form alliances. As more and more alliances were established, many factions sent the strongest combat powers their factions possessed to ensure that the war would end in their favor. Failure was not an option. Although the Martial Alliance was just a slightly larger organization, attacking it gave people the feeling of revolting to usurp power. Finally, there were people who could not hold back any further. One evening, on Greatsword Mountain, far in the western sky, more than 1,000 warriors charged in a mighty formation. These warriors looked like small black dots in the horizon, but increased in size at an alarming speed. In less than a minute, they had already arrived in front of Greatsword Mountain. These people were dressed in various uniforms, clearly indicating that they came from different factions. After the first batch of warriors arrived, another batch of more than 1,000 warriors came from north of Greatsword Mountain. While traveling here, they had formed battle formations. These battle formations were their faction's cornerstone abilities. The disciples that were responsible for setting up the battle formation had undergone years of training and thus also had great teamwork. Following that, warriors from various factions rushed over one after another from other directions. Soon, Greatsword Mountain was surrounded from all directions. In fact, the war against the Martial Alliance had been planned for days. Many factions were monitoring the situation. So when the first faction made its move, the other factions that could arrive in time all made their moves as well. Hence, a few thousand people had quickly gathered around the Martial Alliance's Greatsword Mountain. The terrifying aura simmered in the horizons as beams of divine halos shot down from the sky. These people included many old freaks who had been in reclusion from the various large factions. These old freaks had already given up authority in their family clans and instead began reclusive cultivation in a bid to extend their lives. They would only act if their family clan encountered dangers or if important matters happened. And now, the reason why many of them acted was not only because of the future of their family clans, but the immensely attractive longevity extending pills. That was sufficient reason enough to stop their reclusion. More than 10 such old freaks of this level had appeared. Heaven Earth Yuan Qi surged through the sky and lands. These patriarchs, or grand elders, who had been in reclusion for long periods of time, all had serious expressions, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. They did not know how powerful the Alliance leader was. According to what the Desolate race said, he had been born tens of millions of years ago, and was a terrifying figure to have reincarnated up to now. Such a person would require a great deal of effort to destroy. It was even possible that they could perish if they were careless. Dear fellow martial practitioners, are you gathered here to destroy my martial alliance? A man dressed in grey robes appeared. When the various large factions were preparing to besiege the Martial Alliance had already discovered their actions. However, they did not do anything despite discovering it. The surroundings of the Martial Alliance was monitored, so if the Martial Alliance had chosen to abandon Greatsword Mountain and escape, it was equivalent to telling the Tianyuan world's large factions that they were afraid. The outcome would be even more disastrous. They could be attacked during their escape attempt. A majority of the Martial Alliance were only the Martial Alliance's subordinates. They did not know of the existence of Blood Moon and were kept in the dark. However, there were also a considerable number of people who were true Blood Moon members. These people were the nucleus of the Martial Alliance's strength. Chapter 666, The Martial Alliance's Destruction. The Blood Moon members left behind to guard Greatsword Mountain had informed the Alliance leader the moment the various large factions came attacking, asking for his advice. However, the Alliance leader did not return to preside over the situation. He had important things to do, so he only informed the Blood Moon Politburo that he was in reclusive death training and that once he made a breakthrough, he could wipe out the Tianyuan world alone. As for the other Blood Moon members, the orders the Alliance leader gave them was to guard Greatsword Mountain. And if possible, they were to defend until he returned. Amongst the Blood Moon members, some of them were inspectors who had been personally refined by the Alliance leader. There was a mental connection between these inspectors and the Alliance leader, so they would execute his orders. As for the others, they lacked the fortitude. Defend? What were they to use to defend? Against the grey-robed man's question, an elder sneered from the clouds. Destroy the Martial Alliance? He. You still dare to call yourself the Martial Alliance? The organization known as the Martial Alliance has long since been secretly controlled by you, Blood Moon. You have concealed the facts about the Great War that happened tens of millions of years ago, distorting the truth and privately hoarding the martial inheritances that should belong to the Tian Yuan world. Furthermore, you even attempted to sacrifice all of the elites in the Tian Yuan world a few days ago, all for your nefarious schemes. To think that you have the shame to address yourselves as the Martial Alliance? Such an evil cult is enough reason for people to destroy it. The elder's voice was loud and clear as it resounded like thunder from the sky. Momentarily, many members of the Martial Alliance turned dumbfounded upon hearing this. Many of them did not know anything about the relationship between the Martial Alliance and Blood Moon. They suspected the words the elder said, but was still unsure of what had happened. As for the opposing side, many people from the large factions were filled with fighting spirit. Although it was a battle, they all had their own selfish reasons. It could be said to be a plundering battle, but with reason on their side, they could plunder with their hearts at ease. Attack and break through the mountain in trance, the elder bellowed. Although the Martial Alliance's protective array was extremely formidable, how could it withstand the attacks from so many mighty figures? Up in the sky, the old freaks from various sects attacked together. As 9 colored beams tore through the sky, the surrounding heaven-earth Yuan-Chi exploded into chaos, turning the scene into one that resembled Armageddon. Boom! Under the powerful combined forces, Greatsword Mountain began to tremble. As the entrance's array began to fracture, a few Martial Alliance members, who remained too close to the arrays, suffered as their organs were being torn apart due to the tremors. They vomited large mouthfuls of blood. As for those with weaker cultivation levels, their organs were reduced to a messy mix of blood and flesh after their meridians were severed from the turmoil. Charge, leave no one alive. An elder transmitted his voice from the clouds. Since time immemorial, human wars were bloody and cruel. A typical extermination of a faction usually meant that no stone was left unturned, so as to prevent any future repercussions. Thousands of warriors charged into Greatsword Mountain like a swarm of locusts. These people were the Tian Yuan world's cream of the crop. As they attacked together, the sky was filled with thundering clouds amidst an inferno sea. The mighty figures of the various factions from the Tian Yuan world did not show any mercy. As they swarmed forth, not a single life was spared in their path. The Martial Alliance, which had previously enjoyed a magnificent existence, was now reduced to a pile of corpses after the slaughter from the various large factions. You are courting death with your blasphemy against the Divine Master. A Blood Moon inspector roared, however he was met with a saber beam. Go to hell to find your Divine Master. With the saber beam forming a curved arc, it sliced off his head. Even the soul residing within his head exploded as well. Guliolu. With the head landing on the ground, the inspector's eyes stared widely, dying with everlasting regret. The inspectors, that were used to staying behind the Martial Alliance, were limited in strength. They were usually responsible for the daily affairs of the Martial Alliance. The truly powerful inspectors were all sleeping within the Soul Tomb. However, these powerful inspectors had all been destroyed by Yi Yun. Blood Moon had suffered disastrously from the battle within the Soul Tomb. The killer stepped onto the rolling head with one leg before pouncing towards the Greatsword Mountain's peak. Far in the distance, about 50 kilometers away, a man and 2 women were watching all of this happen from a black mountain peak. These 3 people were Yi Yun, Lin Xintong, and Jiang Xiaro. They were here to witness the Martial Alliance's destruction, but they knew very well that the Martial Alliance was going to be easily destroyed, but it would not be so simple to wipe out Blood Moon. There aren't any experts. The true experts of Blood Moon are not on Greatsword Mountain. The people left behind here are either auxiliary members or Martial Alliance members who died cluelessly. Yi Yun quickly figured out the situation. The people left behind on Greatsword Mountain were just sacrifices. They were likely used as dummy targets to divert attention. Yi Yun did not know what the true master of Blood Moon was doing. According to information obtained from Fengming and Sheiji, Yun only knew that the revived inspectors were meant to be brought to a certain location in the untraversable sea so as to complete a task. However, the untraversable sea was too vast and the exact location was not known by Fengming or Sheiji. Now with all the inspectors dead, the plans the Blood Moon had could no longer be executed, but the disappearance of the upper echelons of Blood Moon while the Tian Yuan world besieged Greatsword Mountain cast a cloud over Yun's head. He was not expecting the upper echelons of Blood Moon to die in this slaughter, but dealing a severe blow to Blood Moon was also something he would love to see.
Yuner, what should we do now?
Jiang Shiro asked softly. As she looked at the battle in the distance, Blood Moon's remnant forces were completely wiped out. Without a leader or any expert holding down Greatsword Mountain, and facing enemies more than 10 times stronger than them, the battle outcome was imaginable.
Let us leave first. Increasing our strength is of utmost importance.
I plan on breaking through to the Yuan opening realm. After cultivating the Great Empress Heart Sutra, he had accumulated enough and it was time to make a breakthrough.
As long as he had sufficient strength, he could cope with shifting events by sticking to a fundamental principle.
Yes. Lin Xintong and Jiang Shiro agreed and accompanied him as they flew up and far into the distance.
Along the way, they also saw many onlooking warriors in the distance.
It even included former Heavenly Blood Union members. These Heavenly Blood Union members had signed a soul contract with the Martial Alliance. And since the soul contract restricted them from attacking the Martial Alliance, as well as not allowing them to disobey any non-fatal orders of the Martial Alliance, they could only be onlookers.
Yun, Lin Xintong and Jiang Shiro disappeared over the horizon. At this moment, the various Tian Yuan world large factions of course realized that Blood Moon did not have any reasonable resistance.
However, they did not care about this and still slaughtered everything in their path. A group of people charged towards the Martial Alliance's core palace, afraid of being behind others. A path of slaughtering led to a path of blood. The Martial Alliance, which was used to conceal Blood Moon, had existed for tens of thousands of years, over numerous disjointed periods of time, had finally met the day of their destruction today.
Chapter 667, Dread. The battle that destroyed the Martial Alliance lasted for half a day.
The ancient organization may have existed for such a long period of time, but its destruction happened in such a short span of time, making it quite a reflective and sorrowful event. At this moment, the elders of the large factions that had destroyed the Martial Alliance had arrived at the treasury. The Martial Alliance's treasury was sealed in an array, but how could such an array withstand the combined attacks of the various Grand Elders from the Tian Yuan world's major factions?
The array crumbled and then the elders and legendary figures of the Tian Yuan world entered the treasury.
As the resistance they faced was nothing intense, and the true upper echelons of Blood Moon were no longer on Greatsword Mountain, it worried the elders who entered the treasury.
Could Blood Moon have secretly removed the treasures in the treasury?
Under the existing situation, the elders did not have their hopes up. However, when they charged into the treasury, they were finally able to confirm that there were still large amounts of treasure stored in the treasury. There were ancient heritage in the form of jade scrolls, pills, relics and longevity extending pills that they desired. However, the top 2 levels of the treasury had been completely emptied.
They did not find the most essential inheritance like the Heavenly Tao Reincarnation Grand Technique.
However, even without those, just the first few levels of the treasury was enough to make the large factions turn red-eyed. Since time immemorial, it was easy to invade a fort collectively, but the splitting of the war trophies was after the successful invasion was always a problem. There were no lack of accounts in history where a number of sects collectively destroy a large sect, but then, they would end up in another war when it came to the dispute of splitting the resources or spiritual lands.
Everyone.
A white-haired woman spoke to the crowd that faced the treasury. I suggest we first seal the treasury. Every faction will send one person to negotiate the distribution of the treasures.
Other than pills, relics and longevity extending pills which are one-time consumable items, there are ancient heritage that should be shared amongst the factions of the Tian Yuan world, right?
The moment the old woman spoke, Man People slightly faltered. Distribution of the treasures was indeed a problem. The Martial Alliance's treasury was no trifling matter. In front of such enormous benefits, especially the longevity-extending pills and the ancient heritage that would allow their factions to soar, no one was unmoved. The negotiations would likely take months without any agreement. In the end, there might even be another war to decide on the matter. The Martial Alliance is gone. However, the upper echelons of Blood Moon have not been eradicated. They are not a tiny threat towards us. I suggest that all the major factions in the Tian Yuan world should form an elder consortium to lead the Tian Yuan world collectively. First, it will be in charge of distributing the treasures in the treasury, and secondly, it would be responsible for destroying Blood Moon, so as to exterminate them completely. Another elder stood forward to speak up. The number of members in an elder consortium formed from the various large factions was naturally extremely important to each faction. An elder consortium formed by us to lead the Tian Yuan world? Have any of you considered Yiyun? Someone suddenly said this in the crowd, causing the atmosphere to turn livid. Yiyun! That person was an anomaly in the Tian Yuan world. Especially with Lin Xintong beside him, who had extraordinary strength. If the two of them combined forces, along with Jiang Xiao, he naturally had sufficient strength to enter the Elder Consortium. Alternatively, Yiyun might not even think anything of the Elder Consortium and completely disregard the decisions made by the Elder Consortium. This naturally made many feel uncomfortable. Ignoring the Elder Consortium, just a portion of the treasures in the treasury should belong to Yiyun. Don't forget how many people he saved from the Soul Tomb. Those are the most promising juniors from all our factions. Someone in the crowd said. The people present were all important figures of the various large factions. Their every decision would stir up the Tian Yuan world. Distribute the treasures? Upon hearing this, many people frowned. In their hearts, Yiyun was an unpredictable factor. In fact, no one present wished to see Yiyun become stronger. Towards the present Yiyun, most of them did not feel grateful to Yiyun for saving their juniors, they were feeling dread. A person who was overly powerful could upset the existing balance. If this person was kind-hearted and without a care in the world, then that would be fine. However, if he was a ruthless person who acted wantonly, that would result in a disaster. No one wished that their own family and lives would be in the hands of another. Yiyun has a desolate race sister, Jiang Xiao. Are you sure that after Yiyun joins the Elder Consortium, he would stand on the side of the human race? In my opinion, his relationship with the desolate race is closer. In the Soul Tomb trials, other than saying that Yiyun saved the human race's geniuses, you can also say that he was there just to save his sister. At this moment, a stout elder spoke. He was dressed in a blue robe and he had gray long hair. His sword-like eyebrows shot out diagonally while his eyes burned like torches. This person was the strongest person in the Shintu family clan, the Shintu Patriarch. Years ago, he had injured the shepherd boy with his divine-willed attack that remained in the shepherd boy's body for a decade without being completely removed. Later on, the vendetta between the Shintu family clan and Yiyun intensified. And the Shintu family clan learned a few days ago that Yiyun had appeared in the Shintu family clan. He had killed Zhulong together with Lin Xintong, and his rise was no longer stoppable. The one faction in the entire Tian Yuan world that was most afraid of Yiyun's rise had to be the Shintu family clan. Of course, there was another faction that was not too much different. That was the Li Fire sect. The Li Fire sect's Grand Elder spoke up. Everyone, I believe many of the factions you stand for have had unpleasant experiences with Yiyun in the past, or even feuds. For example, those who entered the Great Empress Mystic Realm together with Yiyun, as well all those family clans that signed their names on the Martial Alliance's wanted poster. And those who suppressed the Lin family, and factions that kicked them while they were down. The number of factions that did that probably is not a small number. Have any one of you realized that at this speed, Yiyun and Lin Xintong, who have inherited the Great Empress inheritance, will not need much time to reach a terrifying step where they can be the true masters of the Tian Yuan world? The combined forces of the duo would not be difficult for them to reach the ancient Great Empress realm. When that happens, we would be like fish on the chopping block, at their mercy. The Li Fire sect's Grand Elder engaged in demagoguery. No matter who it was, no one wished to see a person who could decide their fate or lives. However, it was also impossible for them to lean towards the Li Fire sect and Shintu family clan's position. On Yi Yun's imminent rise, many people would rather befriend him. If they were to offend Yi Yun at this moment, revenge could be sought on them, and it was a consequence that they could not bear. As the elders of the large factions were in deliberation, a flash occurred in the Great Empress mystic realm. Yi Yun, Lin Xintong and Jiang Xiaro appeared in the closed-off world. Chapter 668, Dao Seeds breaks the Yuan Foundation. To Yi Yun, the Great Empress mystic realm was an absolutely safe haven. The Great Empress mystic realm was completely sealed off, and Yi Yun had absolute freedom in controlling its entrances and exits. Hence, without his consent, it was impossible for Blood Moon to enter the Great Empress mystic realm. It was a world that belonged to him. Is this the vestige remains of the ancient Great Empress? High in the sky, tens of thousands feet high, there was a small arch that resembled a floating window. Jiang Xiaro stood there watching the bridges that seemed to hover midair like ribbons. The bridges led to a mysterious, mist-shrouded world. And Jiang Xiaro could sense an air of ancientness and vastness from that world. Jiang Xiaro already knew that Lin Xintong and Yi Yun had experienced trials in this mystic realm more than 7 years ago. Yi Yun had even walked on the bridges, undergoing a variety of challenges on them. Eventually, Yi Yun and Lin Xintong had obtained the inheritance left behind by the ancient Great Empress in the God Advent Tower. Yi Yun had only given Jiang Xiaro a brief description of the trials, but Jiang Xiaro knew that it was actually trials fraught with danger due to the inspector's entry. Let us go in. Yi Yun led Jiang Xiaro and Lin Xintong to a black stone square. In the past, this ancient square was where the God Advent Tower stood erect, but today, the God Advent Tower had already been taken by Yi Yun. With a thought, a tiny 6-story pagoda flew out of Yi Yun's dantian. The tiny pagoda rotated midair, and it rapidly expanded, making it the size of a heavenly pillar. The gigantic divine pagoda landed on the black stone square, while beneath it, the three of them looked as tiny as worms before a towering divine tree. Yi Yun and the two women walked hand in hand into the God Advent Tower. After Yi Yun obtained the Great Empress inheritance, he believed that Jiang Xiaro too could enter the God Advent Tower and upgrade her strength. Although Jiang Xiaro had a unique bloodline, her strength was mostly reflected by her ability to control desolate beasts. In terms of her own body's strength, she was still weaker than Yi Yun and Lin Xintong. To warriors, the most important thing was naturally their own strength. Sis Xiaro, in the first and second levels of the God Advent Tower, there are visual array discs of battles left behind by antecedents, as well as large quantities of manuals and mystic techniques. I will enter reclusive training together with Xintong now. Sis Xiaro, after you browse through these manuals and gain some further insight, I'll pass you the core teachings of the Great Empress Heart Sutra. But the Great Empress Heart Sutra was the most important piece of inheritance the ancient Great Empress left behind. Since it was an inheritance, it definitely needed to be passed on. After Yi Yun inherited the inheritance, he too had the responsibility and qualifications to pass it down. He chose Jiang Xiaro to be another inheritor of the Great Empress Heart Sutra because he believed that she would not be a disgrace towards the Great Empress Heart Sutra. Although Jiang Xiao's physique and bloodline leaned towards yin and softness, she did not have naturally terminated meridians. Her cultivation speed in the Great Empress Heart Sutra would naturally not be as fast as Lin Xintong's blazing speed in cultivation. Okay. Jiang Xiaro looked at Yi Yun while she felt a rush of bliss. Without Yi Yun, she really would be at a loss as to what to do. Jiang Xiaro stepped into the first level of the God Advent Tower, while Yi Yun and Lin Xintong entered the God Advent Tower's fifth level where the cultivation chamber filled with ice and fire was. They had spent 6 years of their lives in here previously. Let us begin. All right. Lin Xintong smoothed her lips as she gently took off her stainless white dress. She then sat opposite Yi Yun and engaged in contact with him. Back when Lin Xintong was cultivating arduously in the divine wilderness, Yi Yun had entered the Heavenly Dao Union. Their separation lasted for half a year, but now they were reunited. As Lin Xintong embraced Yi Yun, she felt a long-awaited sense of fullness in her heart. She was a very independent woman and did not make it a habit to rely on others. However, while she cultivated relentlessly in the divine wilderness, she faced the cold moon and endless desolate plains alone. This made her feel a sense of emptiness at times, as if she needed something to fill her heart to the brim. Lin Xintong slowly realized that the feeling was the longing for Yi Yun. That feeling was something faint, but yet it kept churning in her mind, with no way of brushing it off. Now, while hugging Yi Yun and experiencing Yi Yun's breathing and being, that sense of emptiness was slowly filled to the brim. Lin Xintong was not a woman who was good at expressing herself. She only hugged Yi Yun and listened to his heart beating and remained silent. Yi Yun also hugged Lin Xintong and experienced Lin Xintong's silk-like smooth skin that was as cool as refreshing spring water. He did not think about anything, nor consider Blood Moon or his future, much less consider the cultivation of his cultivation technique. Even so, the worldly yin-yang energy still automatically circulated between the two of them. This circulation was not controlled by Lin Xintong or Yi Yun. The two of them had completely emptied their minds, allowing the yin-yang energies to circulate according to their natural order, and its natural order was in greatest harmony with heavenly Tao laws. This was because the circulation of yin-yang energies was a heavenly Tao itself. And as their hearts neared each other, it allowed the pure yang and pure yin to harmonize into perfection. As yin and yang converged, a taiji picture formed within the chamber. It was not drawn by human means, but a taiji symbol naturally formed from the world's yin and yang energies. Unknowingly, the two of them had entered a no law, no shape, no void, no me ethereal state. Every cell in their bodies seemed to possess a life of its own as they automatically respirated the heaven-earth yuan qi. The pair was different from other warriors who used their body's acupuncture points to absorb heaven-earth yuan qi, and then transmit the energy through their meridians into their limbs. As the two of them embraced, their bodies were tempered by the energies, becoming even purer, with not a single impurity. It was unknown how much time passed as time became nothing but an afterthought. There was only the heaven-earth yuan qi and yin-yang energies that were constantly accumulated in Yi Yun and Lin Xintong's bodies. This accumulation slowly reached the maximum point which their respective dantians could withstand. The Yuan foundation in their dantian was compressed again and again. However, the remaining heaven-earth yuan qi was still too dense and intense to the point of them deliquescing in a fog above the Yuan foundation. At the same time, the nomological insights Yi Yun and Lin Xintong possessed slowly gathered together, forming worldly runes. These runes then gathered together to form clouds. When the yuan qi density reached its apex, it could no longer remain suspended in the layer of clouds. Instead, it formed precipitation that rained down. As the yuan qi raindrops came pattering down, it nourished the yuan foundation soil. These energetic raindrops slowly seeped down into the Yuan foundation, and surged towards the Tao seed that was buried within the Yuan foundation. With laws as clouds, and Yuan qi as rain, descending on the Yuan foundation, the Tao seed was nourished. In this manner, the duo's Tao seed within their Yuan foundation was nourished under the energetic rain, and began to slowly sprout. A crystal-clear sapling broke out of the seed's exterior as it grew upwards bit by bit. The tiny sapling was as transparent as a crystal, but its surface was carved with nomological runes, making it look extremely profound and intricate. As the soil on the Yuan foundation was slowly pushed apart by the sapling, this process of breaking open the Yuan foundation was known as Yuan opening. Once the Tao seed fully sprouted, and the sapling brought out of the soil, Yi Yun and Lin Xintong would officially enter the Yuan opening realm. Chapter 669, Attaining Yuan Opening. In the God Advent Tower, as Yi Yun and Lin Xintong engaged in a warm, enveloping embrace, they forgot the passage of time.
Breaking through to the Yuan opening realm required an immense quantity of Yuan Qi.
This amount of Yuan Qi could not be completely stored within their Dantian, and instead needed to be accumulated over a prolonged period of time.
Typical warriors would usually spend an entire decade or two just to break into the Yuan opening realm.
In Lin Xintong and Yi Yun's Yuan Foundation, the Dao seed sprout continued growing under the Yuan Qi's constant nourishment, becoming ever taller.
Surrounding the two of them was dense Yuan Qi.
Above their heads was a cloud layer formed from Yuan Qi and laws. The Dao seed sprout's phantom image appeared from within their dantians, and seemed to envelop the two of them. Yi Yun and Lin Xintong seemed to be develop and grow along with a small world that recently came into existence. Their bodies were like primordial rocks that gave life. Every breath and heartbeat they took was the frequency at which the world grew. Their respective Dao seed tree grew taller, in step with their breathing. It stretched out its tender foliage, respiring that world's heaven-earth Yuan Qi. After some time, the sprout slowly matured into a tree sapling.
Many people's Yuan opening realm would only reach such a stage.
Their Dao seeds tree would expend all the energy after just breaking into the Yuan opening realm, so they would come to a stop at this point.
However, Yi Yun and Lin Xintong went much further than that.
They carried on with their eyes closed. In the world within their bodies, all the clouds gathered together, resulting in rumbling thunder and flashing lightning. Instantly, what seemed like a scene of an immortal's paradise became one that looked like the apocalypse. And in this apocalyptic world, that tiny tree sapling showed no fear to the lightning, nor was it uprooted by the ravaging winds.
Instead, it began to rapidly grow.
1 feet, 2 feet, 5 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet. The tree's sapling grew into a large tree, as its leaves became ever more lush. Every leaf was shaped differently.
Some looked like tiny cauldrons, others looked like swords, and some looked like the 8 trigrams. Although the Dao seeds tree Yi Yun produced was already 2 stories high, in fact, this Dao seed tree was still just a sapling.
The size of the sapling determined how high the Dao seed tree could grow in the future. The Dao seed tree could grow 100 times, 1,000 times, or even 10,000 times till it pierced through the clouds, forming a path to the heavens.
Boom! Boom!
A bolt of lightning flashed, striking the Dao seed tree. And at this moment, 2 sharp screeches accompanied 2 shadows as they appeared from within Yi Yun's body. One was the golden crow, while the other was the 9 neonate. These 2 phantom images circled around the 2 large trees that interweaved each other, before charging into the clouds, so as to face and resist the lightning. Yi Yun and Lin Xintong dual cultivated the Great Empress Heart Sutra. One of them was pure yang and the other was pure yin, but despite that, they could aid one another when they were breaking through to the Yuan opening realm. Even their Dao seed trees were intertwined. They wound around each other, but were separate, independent beings.
A snow-white lotus flower flew out of Lin Xintong's body.
It fluttered in the wind and spun around the 2 large trees, constantly emitting a frosty ice aura that protected the 2 trees.
The 2 trees stood erect in an intertwined fashion as if they were the center of the world.
The golden crow and 9 neonate circled around the tree trunk, while the snow lotus began blooming on the tree's canopy.
Every leaf was formed from Yuan Qi as a result of the abundant Yuan Qi present.
As long as the Dao seed tree did not die, it would constantly provide Yuan Qi to the leaves. Yi Yun opened his eyes, and his eyes seemed to flash with both lightning and fire. Even when he stretched his body, his joints would emit a sound that resembled a muffled thunder. At this moment, Lin Xintong also opened her eyes.
Her eyes looked like a deep lake, and one could seem to see snow lotuses littered across the lake.
Her aura was extremely holy and sacred, as if any living creature that saw her would be put to shame.
Yuan opening realm.
Yi Yun clenched his fists as he experienced the surging Yuan Qi in his body. From this moment onwards, other than increasing his strength, just Yi Yun's realm alone allowed him to enter the top ranks of human warriors in the Tian Yuan world. And from this moment onwards, warriors would possess a long life. Breaking through to the Yuan opening realm was like being reborn. The Tao seed tree within their bodies was a reflection of their limbs, and the leaves' veins were all their meridians. As such, even the weakest Yuan opening realm warrior would have a lifespan of about 10,000 years. And for peak Yuan opening realm warriors, their lifespans could even reach tens of thousands of years. As the Tao seed tree absorbed and produced heaven-earth Yuan Qi, the Yuan opening warrior would have nearly endless amounts of Yuan Qi. Furthermore, the Tao seed tree produced by Yi Yun and Lin Xintong was even more terrifying. It seemed earth-shattering. From the moment it appeared, it had already formed the ghostly image of a small world. This breakthrough probably took us 2 or 3 years.
Yi Yun tenderly helped Lin Xintong wear her clothes as he spoke.
Breaking through to the Yuan opening realm was extremely time-consuming. Using a decade was already considered fast. Those who lacked the talent might even need to go into reclusion for 20 or even 30 years. The main reason was that the Tao seed tree required a long period of time to grow from a sapling. Ignoring a tree, just a tiny blade of grass took a year's time to go from sprouting to withering. And most warriors did not accumulate enough Yuan Qi within their Yuan foundation. After the Tao seed tree sprouted, the first month would cause all their Yuan Qi to be depleted. The future growth of the Tao seed tree would have to rely on the accumulation of time. During this period, if a person lacked Yuan Qi and his foundation was insufficient, there was a high chance of a breakthrough failure. The Tao seed tree sprout would wither due to a lack of energy. Then, they would have to start all over again. To the Tian Yuan world's warriors, no one could afford such failure. This was equivalent to destroying most of their martial path.
This was the reason why most young juniors in the Tian Yuan world would choose not to break through to the Yuan opening realm.
They were halted at the peak of the Tao seed realm until they were 50 or 60 years old. Sometimes, some might even wait till they were 100 years old. This was because the amount of time the breakthrough took was too long and the process was too difficult. Without enough accumulation in foundation and nomological insight, they did not dare attempt the breakthrough. During the past 2 or 3 years, Yi Yun and Lin Xintong continuously increased their strength while in reclusion. They were completely cut off from the external world, so they did not know what the Tian Yuan world had become. However, before going into reclusion, Lin Xintong and Jiang Shiro had already separately informed the Lin family and the Desolate race to be on the alert and conserve their strength.
"Let us go out,"
Yi Yun said while looking into Lin Xintong's eyes as she returned his gaze. In the 6th floor of the God Advent Tower, Jiang Shiro was sitting in a small building in a bamboo forest. An ancient aura lingered around her body, and sitting on the wooden platforms in front of her were parts of the Great Empress Heart Sutra. Yi Yun had only woken once in the past 3 years, which was to pass the Great Empress Heart Sutra to Jiang Shiro. Jiang Shiro had extremely high perception. She used 2 years to pass the first 5 levels of the God Advent Tower, and finished reading all the canonical material. She had also chosen some that suited her cultivation. Jiang Shiro, who had been recognized by the sacred spirit and had the best bloodline in the Desolate race, was definitely a peerless genius. Furthermore, in the Azure Yang Lord's massive collection, there was quite a number of canonical manuals that was not meant for humans. There were no records of such canonical manuals in the Desolate race, so when Jiang Shiro saw this, she was naturally delighted. Today, Jiang Shiro suddenly sensed something as she opened her eyes. The moment she opened her eyes, an extremely sacred aura was emitted from her body. The small building in the bamboo forest was perennially covered in snow. However, when that aura swept past the snow, it was like a gentle spring breeze that immediately melted the ice. Lush green grass grew while flowers bloomed. Jiang Shiro sat in the middle of the flowers with a smile on her lips, resembling a fairy that walked out of the forest. She was like an embodiment of the most pure and pretty creation formed by the heaven and earth. She made anyone who saw her feel a sense of endearment and admiration.
"The both of you have broken through to the Yuan opening realm."
As Jiang Shiro looked at Yi Yun and Lin Xintong, who had appeared before her, she sensed their auras and gave a delighted look. They had broken through to the Yuan opening realm in just 3 years, showcasing their absolute genius. The aura emitted from their bodies was extraordinary. Them appearing hand in hand made them appear like a lovely couple that would make people swoon.
Yi-Yun looked at Jiang Xioro and broke out into a smile.
Sis Xiaro, you have broken through also. Jiang Xioro's aura had an ancient air to it. As the cultivation of the desolate race was different from humans, Jiang Xioro was not considered to be in the Yuan opening realm, but she was in a realm close to it.
Shall we go out?
Jiang Xioro asked. Yes, the outside world is ever changing. Now that we have already broken through, it is time to leave the great Empress mystic realm.
Yi-Yun said. I wonder how the Tian Yuan world is like now.
A hint of worry appeared in Lin Xintong's eyes. When they entered reclusion, the alliance leader had already gone missing. It was unknown what he had been doing over the past 2 to 3 years.
Chapter 670, Elder Consortium's Invitation. After leaving the Great Empress Mystic Realm, Jiang Xioro separated from Yi-Yun and Lin Xintong.
Yi-Yun and Lin Xintong headed for the Lin family together, while Jiang Xioro returned to the desolate race. She was worried over her mother after not seeing her for 3 years. Lin Xintong was also slightly perturbed. If the Blood Moon's alliance leader appeared again, it was very likely for him to stir a bloody storm in the Tian Yuan world. And all Lin Xintong could do before this was to warn the Lin family. The moment the Tian Yuan world faced disaster, they were to immediately abandon the Lin family's stronghold and bring the promising offspring of the family into the divine wilderness to seek shelter. Of course, Lin Xintong knew that such cautionary measures were meaningless. If there was really a disaster that the Tian Yuan world could not resist, the thought of a successful escape was just blind hope. Only when Lin Xintong and Yi-Yun returned to the Lin family and saw that everything was peaceful did Lin Xintong finally heave a sigh of relief. It was great that the family was safe and sound. The moment Lin Xintong and Yi-Yun entered the Lin family's mountain entrance, they were immediately recognized by the disciples guarding the entrance.
Miss. Young Master Yi. The entrance guards were youths in their 20s.
They were extremely excited seeing Yi-Yun and Lin Xintong appear hand in hand. Over the past few years, news of what Lin Xintong and Yi-Yun had done had already proliferated. The scene of them combining forces to kill Zhulong in the Soul Tomb was vividly described, becoming something that made the Lin family youths feel proud of. The Lin family of the past had suffered all forms of humiliation due to Yi-Yun and Lin Xintong being considered traitors of the human race. Things were also made difficult for them due to the martial alliance. But now, the Lin family had become an extraordinary existence in the entire Tian Yuan world. Over the years, many family clans began to make amendments to the Lin family. The juniors of the Lin family were all treated with respect when they were out of their family grounds. All these benefits they physically experienced were all due to Yi-Yun and Lin Xintong. Miss, the matriarch has been waiting for you all this while. Make haste to see her. The few youths said, and eagerly led the way. Seeing these passionate members of her clan and the familiar family, Lin Xintong felt a faint sense of warmth in her heart. A family clan might be utilitarian at times, making it seem cold and aloof, but it would not make a person feel lonely. Especially when the family clan had the matriarch who loved her so deeply. The return of Yi-Yun and Lin Xintong was treated as a spectacular event for the Lin family. For this, the Lin family specially held a grand banquet to welcome them back. A few large factions that had friendly ties with the Lin family also sent a few of their important figures to attend the banquet, bringing gifts to Yi-Yun and Lin Xintong. As for those family clans that had average relationships with the Lin family, they were not even invited. This made many family clans feel uneasy. They could not guess the Lin family's attitude. They did not know if the Lin family planned on settling scores after having waited for Yi-Yun and Lin Xintong to rise up. When a faction became strong, it would need to expand its lands. Even if Lin Xintong and Yi-Yun were nice people who were at peace with all mankind, was it the same with the Lin family? It was rare for the Lin family to have such an opportunity, so how could it not take the opportunity to expand? An expansion was bound to infringe on the interests of other major factions. Either their territories would be appropriated, or people annexed. The large factions within 1,000,000 miles of the Lin family were all at risk. It was unknown when they would need to uproot themselves or even become a part of the Lin family. On the second day of celebrations, someone sent an invitation. It was to invite Yi Yun and Lin Xintong to Greatsword Mountain so as to discuss the destruction of the Blood Moon remnants, as well as discuss on matters about the development of the Tian Yuan world's martial culture. It was signed the Tian Yuan Elder Consortium. Greatsword Mountain? Tian Yuan Elder Consortium? Yi Yun was momentarily stunned. Greatsword Mountain was previously the stronghold of Blood Moon, and now, it seemed to have been replaced by the Tian Yuan Elder Consortium. It is an organization formed from the current major factions in the Tian Yuan world. Although it is publicly meant to maintain the Tian Yuan world's peace and advance its martial arts, it is actually just a method for these family clans to protect themselves and to separate themselves from Blood Moon. In the past, they had thoughts of inviting you and Xintong to the Tian Yuan Elder Consortium, but both of you had already entered reclusive training. The matriarch, who was sitting beside Yi Yun, explained. At the homecoming banquet, Yi Yun and Lin Xintong each sat on one side of the matriarch. I see. Yi Yun faltered slightly. After a war, victors tended to form an organization that belonged to them, hoping to establish a new order that was in their favor. However, it was too early to sound the trumpets of victory for this war. It was too naive to think of splitting the benefits left behind by Blood Moon. Since they have sent an invitation, there is no harm to going. Yi Yun answered the messenger immediately. By the side, the matriarch frowned. Only when the messenger left did the matriarch say with a deep voice, Greatsword Mountain is no longer what it was in the past. Their invitation might even be a trap. Many factions do not wish to see the both of you mature. What the matriarch said was naturally understood by Yi Yun. This was very likely a treacherous plot, but he said, I understand what matriarch has alerted me to. Don't worry, I have a grasp of the situation. What Yi Yun dreaded the most was Blood Moon's actions. As for the Elder Consortium, Yi Yun did not care too much about it. And he was not very optimistic about this Elder Consortium fighting Blood Moon. However, using it as an open target to attract Blood Moon would likely be effective, since they were the most visible target. After the end of the welcoming banquet, Yi Yun and Lin Xintong headed to Greatsword Mountain. The liaison agents sent by the Tian Yuan Elder Consortium had already prepared teleportation arrays along the way. So, in 2 hours, Yi Yun and Lin Xintong traversed the distance of tens of millions of miles, allowing them to see Greatsword Mountain that towered into the clouds. In just 3 years, Greatsword Mountain looked completely different. Many of the buildings the Martial Alliance left behind had been demolished, and replacing them was a gigantic pagoda that reached out into the skies on the peak of Greatsword Mountain. It was nothing difficult for warriors to construct such a magnificent building on the peak. Very clearly, this gigantic pagoda was the Tian Yuan Elder Consortium's headquarters. Yi Yun took a few glances at the gigantic tower and realized that the pagoda somewhat resembled the God Advent Tower in the Great Empress Mystic Realm. It was unknown what intentions the Tian Yuan Elder Consortium had for them to build it in this shape. Were they envious of the God Advent Tower? Outside the gigantic pagoda, there were several large and powerful arrays set up. The knowledge of these arrays were mostly obtained from the ancient canonical manuals left behind by Blood Moon, so they were extraordinary in strength. Furthermore, this was the headquarters of the Tian Yuan Elder Consortium, so it was not impossible to lay an ambush under the gigantic pagoda. Upon seeing the gigantic pagoda, Lin Xintong's eyebrows ticked up as she said, "Are we going to enter just like that?" Yi Yun opened his energy vision and he saw right through the gigantic pagoda's array to its energy source. After his cultivation level increased greatly, Yi-Yun could use the purple crystal's powers to see through powerful arrays. It was nothing too difficult for him. In a few seconds, he managed to understand the situation of the powerful arrays before saying, "We will enter just like that." Taking the Shinto Patriarch as example, Yi-Yun determined that his cultivation level was only at the early stages of the Heaven Ascension realm. However, he was one of the stronger ones amongst the early stages of the Heaven Ascension realm. As there were very few Heaven Ascension realm experts in the Tian Yuan world, many warriors would be given the title of Imperial King even before they reached the Heaven Ascension realm, such as when they were half-step into the Heaven Ascension realm. After all, an Imperial King was just a complimentary title. It was worth nothing to label a half-step Heaven Ascension expert as an Imperial King, Patriarch, or Great Emperor. Hence, there were more titled Imperial Kings than the actual number of Heaven Ascension realm experts in the Tian Yuan world. And to juniors, these Imperial Kings' cultivation level was too high and not something they could understand. No one knew who was truly in the Heaven Ascension realm or half-step into the Heaven Ascension realm. As for the Shinto Patriarch, he had entered the Heaven Ascension realm for tens of thousands of years, which was why the shepherd boy failed to defeat Shinto Patriarch. As Yi-Yun looked at Shinto Patriarch, he too looked back at him. He was gently stroking his chin while squinting his eyes. His gaze spoke volumes. No one knew what this elder, whose family clan had a grudge with Yi-Yun and killer of his favorite grandchild, Shinto Nantian, was thinking.
Yi-Yun, it looks like the invitation from the Tian Yuan Elder Consortium doesn't possess pure intents.
If I'm not wrong, the person sitting beside the Shinto Patriarch is the Li Fire Sect's Li Fire Grandma. Upon hearing Lin Shintong's words, Yi-Yun shifted his gaze slightly. Sitting beside Shinto Patriarch was a thin, wizened woman. She wore simple gray clothes. Her white hair was tied up into a bun in a sloppy manner, held up by a wooden hairpin. Be it her simple clothes or the style of the wooden hairpin, it all looked very antiquated. If not for Yi-Yun being extremely powerful, allowing him to see through her cultivation level, she would have looked no different to an old granny in an ordinary rural village. If she was thrown into a remote village, no one would have been able to spot her. When Yi-Yun and Lin Shintong entered the hall, Shinto Patriarch at least looked over and sent piercing stares. As for the old woman, she was holding a teacup, slowly drinking her tea, as if Yi-Yun and Lin Shintong weren't there. It was hard to imagine that the Li Fire sect, who this old woman belonged to, had a vendetta with Yi-Yun. In this crowd of old freaks who had disparate motives and thoughts, Yi-Yun and Lin Shintong sat down in the middle of these old freaks in a natural and poised manner. However, the atmosphere turned cold. Other than a few legendary figures who wanted to befriend Yi-Yun, exchanging pleasantries with Yi-Yun, the others remained silent. Slowly, everyone turned quiet. Those who had greeted Yi-Yun also stopped speaking. As the atmosphere in the hall became more solemn and quiet, till it became nearly oppressive, 3 people walked out of a side hall. 2 men and a woman walked straight to the middle seat of the round table. When the 3 of them looked at Yi-Yun and Lin Shintong, one of the men and the woman smiled, while the other man remained expressionless. Yi-Yun slightly faltered. Without a doubt, these 3 people were the principals of the Tian Yuan World's Elder Consortium.
Chapter 672, The Goal of the Elder Consortium. Yi-Yun did not know about the strongest figures in the Tian Yuan world beforehand. The location of these people were always a mystery. Some of them would devote themselves to reclusive training or searching for means to extend their longevity. Some of their reclusive training could even be reclusive death training. They might even enter certain lands and not appear for 10,000 years. Hence, the outside world had no idea if they were alive or dead. Yi-Yun did not recognize the 3 people who had suddenly appeared. However, Lin Shintong knew a lot more about the Tian Yuan world than him. Although she had never met the 3 people before, from their appearance and aura, she was able to guess their identities. The truly legendary figures in the Tian Yuan world were actually only these few people. Amongst these 3 people, the man and the man-woman duo wore a black long robe, while the woman wore a white long robe.
The clothes were same in everything other than color. Even their appearances looked similar. The man had handsome features and he looked like a gentleman in his 40s. The woman had a full buxom and snow-white skin. She was a beautiful young woman. These two people who were dressed very similar were not siblings, they were husband and wife. They lived in an offshore island, known as Sanctuary. There were arrays established around Sanctuary. When other experts passed by, they would fail to detect Sanctuary's existence. It was ethereal and like a mirage. And this married couple resided in Sanctuary. Their cultivation levels were at the early stages of the Heaven Ascension realm. However, their auras were slightly stronger than Shinto patriarchs. Although they were all at the same early stages of the Heaven Ascension, due to various differences, it was not surprising for there to be some difference in strength. Furthermore, this couple was proficient at attacking together. The moment they used the mystic technique together against a foe, even an expert at the middle stages of the Heaven Ascension realm would not necessarily gain much advantage over them. As for the last person, he was an old man dressed in a long robe. He was extremely tall, at least one head higher than many of the Tian Yuan world legendary figures. He was skinny, and together with his height, he gave off a horrifying feeling like he was simply a skeleton wrapped up in skin. Lin Xintong recalled that the legends of the Tian Yuan world called him the sovereign of the Eventide. His cultivation level was at the middle stages of the Heaven Ascension realm. He was very likely the only warrior in the Tian Yuan world, other than Blood Moon's leaders, who had entered the middle stages of the Heaven Ascension realm. The sovereign of the Eventide had appeared in this world as early as 100,000 years ago. However, about tens of thousands of years ago, he had disappeared. It was unexpected that he was still alive all those years. Seeing the sovereign of the Eventide's physical condition, although his vital potential was fully depleted, his life force was in no way weak. No one knew how many more years he could live on for. Blood Moon's appearance and destruction had made many of these true experts, that had not walked the planet for a very long time, appear again. Be it the ancient heritage or the longevity extending pills, they were all extremely alluring to them. Furthermore, in the treasury left behind by Blood Moon, that was just a small portion of the existing treasures. The most critical treasures were lost, including the Heavenly Tao Reincarnation Grand Technique that everyone coveted. No one present knew the contents of cultivation limitations of the Heavenly Tao Reincarnation Grand Technique. If there was no age limitation, then maybe they too could cultivate it? Lin Xintong transmitted her voice, and in a very short amount of time, she informed Yun of the three people's identities. In fact, their identities were unimportant to Yun. Yun could not care any less about their past, all he cared about was their present strength and whether they were friend or foe. The three people sat in the most central spot along the round table. The black-robed sovereign of the Eventide raised his eyes and glanced at Yun. His eyes were dark, as if they were bottomless vortices that led to another dimension. I believe your female partner beside you has already informed you who the three of us are. The sovereign of the Eventide said in a deep voice. Although he could not hear Lin Xintong's transmission, he could sense the faint acoustic energy fluctuations. However, let me introduce myself. I am the principal of the Tian Yuan Elder Consortium. Junior, you are a smart person, so I will not throw out high-sounding perfunctory words. The Tian Yuan Elder Consortium has two goals. The first is to find the treasures left behind by Blood Moon. Every single one will be distributed to people accordingly to their efforts and status. Second, it is to establish a new order so as to maintain the future balance amongst the major factions of the Tian Yuan world, so as to fend off any possible invasion of the desolate race. The sovereign of the Eventide's voice was not loud, but the words he said were highly impactful that caused one's eardrums to reverberate. Yun silently listened to him. He was not at all surprised about it. These people would never give up on the treasures. Ignoring the Heavenly Tao Reincarnation Grand Technique, just the longevity extending pills were not enough to satiate them. They definitely wanted to know the refining mystic technique used to produce longevity-extending pills. As for the desolate race, the humans considered the desolate race alien. They had been hostile for many years, so there was no way for both sides to live in peace. The human race refused to trust the desolate race, and similarly, the desolate race did not trust the human race either. Then, Yi Yun asked calmly. Joining the Tianyuan World's Elder Consortium is only limited to Heaven Ascension Realm experts, but we decided to invite you and Lin Xintong to become members of it. When we eventually find the complete Blood Moon treasures, we would naturally distribute some to you, according to your contributions and posts. Okay. Yi Yun's reaction was cold and listless. He knew the matter that the sovereign of the Eventide raised was that simple. Furthermore, he did not think highly of Blood Moon's treasures. He knew that the sovereign of the Eventide suggestion of letting him and Lin Xintong join the Tianyuan Elder Consortium was not just to give them benefits. Yi Yun slightly looked at the sovereign of the Eventide before saying, and then? Against Yi Yun's cold and calm response, the sovereign of the Eventide frowned slightly. He had enjoyed a high stature for a prolonged period of time, so he naturally did not like a junior appearing as if he had everything under his control in front of him. The sovereign of the Eventide said, Junior, if you are willing to join the Tianyuan Elder Consortium, we wish that you would abide to the Elder Consortium's rules. After joining, there is one rule, and that is to not kill one another. It includes not supporting the faction behind you in their attack on other factions that the other members of the Elder Consortium belong to. Is that so? I see. Yi Yun laughed out loudly. This will also need a soul contract to be signed, right? The Elder Consortium's rules had to be abided by everyone, so naturally, a soul contract needed to be signed or it would mean nothing. But in fact, this rule was targeted Yi Yun. Everyone present dreaded Yi Yun, afraid that after he fully matured, he would be able to dominate the entire Tianyuan world. When that happened, no one would be able to stop him. Seeing Yi Yun smile, the sovereign of the Eventide's expression turned gloomy. Yi Yun was too presumptuous in front of him. He admitted that he might not be Yi Yun's match in the future, but now, Yi Yun had yet to fully mature. Of course a soul contract has to be signed. Shintu Patriarch spoke. He stared at Yi Yun with a cold gaze. Chapter 673, 10 Corpses. Signing a soul contract again? Yi Yun laughed as he shook his head. Why? You plan on not signing? Beside Shintu Patriarch, a grey-clothed Li Fire grandma slowly drank her tea and she looked at Yi Yun with a gaze that spoke volumes. Yi Yun did not care about this old woman and he said in a very nonchalant tone, signing a soul contract, making me never attack all of you. That is the true goal of this Elder Consortium. Why didn't you say the main point earlier? Was there a need to beat about the bush? But as a deal, there should be some mutual benefits. And in the soul contract that you produced to restrict me, what benefits do I get if I agree to it? This is not a deal. Li Fire Grandma's voice turned cold. This is letting you join the Tianyuan Elder Consortium. And joining the Tianyuan Elder Consortium means abiding to the Elder Consortium's rules. You and Lin Xintong will obtain 2 seats. Do you know how many major factions would pay to have those 2 seats? Only you are unwilling to join, saying words of insult. Against the Li Fire Grandma's reprimanding, Yi Yun shook his head slowly. Granny, you sure got engrossed in acting. I'm not a young child, so why are you acting? The so-called permission of letting Xintong and I join the Tianyuan Elder Consortium is just a sham, but indeed, you were right on one thing. I can't be bothered to join this Elder Consortium. What are you basing on for me to abide to your rules? As for you, you will have to produce some benefits that makes the mark. Is it that so-called Blood Moon treasures which you would give a tiny piece of it to me after it is found? What sort of benefit is that? That benefit. I'm very sorry, but I really don't think much of it. Yi Yun spoke with no holds barred. When the legendary figures of the Tian Yuan world heard this, their expressions turned ugly. Even the elders of major factions, who planned on befriending Yi Yun, gasped. The way Yi Yun spoke was too arrogant. Nice. Nice. Just as what I said. Shinto Patriarch stared at Yi Yun as killing intent surged out. Did all of you hear that? I mentioned it before that this person is arrogant and vicious. He has a mean personality, and he likes to stab people in the dark. Yet you choose not to believe my words. You even thought that he would obediently sign the soul contract and contribute to the Tian Yuan Elder Consortium? Now do you know how ridiculously wrong you were? Clearly, before Yi Yun's arrival, there was an internal debate amongst the Tian Yuan Elder Consortium on how to deal with Yi Yun. People like Shinto Patriarch naturally wanted to kill Yi Yun before he managed to fully mature. But a majority of the people still wanted to negotiate with Yi Yun. It was not because they did not dread Yi Yun, it was the exact opposite. It was because they dreaded Yi Yun too much. If they failed to kill him, they would be killed by Yi Yun in the future. Hence, despite Yi Yun being in control of the Great Empress Mystic Realm and having the peerless inheritance from the ancient Great Empress that countless number of people coveted and dreaded, no one made a move on him while he was sitting there. They were still on the sidelines, weighing the possibilities. Yi Yun scanned his surroundings and he could sense that killing intent had arose in some of the legendary figures present. He sighed and said, "What tragedy! The remnants of Blood Moon have not been vanquished. In the near future, they will set off a bloody storm in the Tian Yuan world, and all you can think of now is to engage in internecine struggles. Prevention is better than cure. Don't you know that the true disaster comes from the original owners of Greatsword Mountain where you are currently sitting on?" Yi Yun shook his head in his heart. He did not think that they were short-sighted, he thought that they had yet to recognize the terror that Blood Moon could bring about. As for the desolate race's description of Blood Moon's past, these people did not believe one bit. Hence, they had highly underestimated Blood Moon. And to people like Shinto Patriarch, Yi Yun's rise in power was not much better than Blood Moon's rise in power. In fact, it was worse. Upon hearing Yi Yun's words, Shinto Patriarch laughed. What ignorance this boy has! To keep expounding on a disaster. Do you really think you are a clairvoyant, allowing you to see the future? As for the remnants of Blood Moon. Humph. As Shinto Patriarch spoke, he gave the sanctuary couple a glance. The black-robed man of the couple slowly stood up. Previously, when Yi Yun and the other legendary figures of the Tian Yuan world were jumping at each other's throats, they remained on the sidelines. They did not comment or make any special expressions. Now with the black-robed man standing up, his expression remained indifferent. He wiped across his interspatial ring and said in a calm voice, "While I was crossing the untraversable sea, I happened to come across this." As he spoke, 10 beams of white light flew out from the black-robed man's interspatial ring. The white beams suspended midair, and as the lights faded, Yi Yun and Lin Xintong were able to see that they were 10 white rectangular objects. The objects were wrapped up in chains. No one knew what material they were made of, but the objects looked like coffins. 10 coffins? As the black-robed man waved his hand, the chains opened up automatically with rumbling noises. The coffin's lids were also opened. Inside the coffin were 10 corpses. These corpses were all dressed in black robes. And on the left breast of the black robes, there were embroidered blood moons. Although these 10 people were dead, they still exuded an alarming aura. This aura lingered around them, making their corpses appear to possess life. The corpses of many peerless experts would remain seemingly immortal even 10,000 years later. And when their bodies eventually decayed, the bones left behind would be crystalline like jade. Some of them might not even decay even hundreds of millions of years later. Very clearly, the 10 corpses were experts when they were alive. Especially the person in the middle. He had a large build and his black hair seemed like a torrential storm, filling the entire coffin. In the middle of his eyebrows, there was a flame-shaped scar that radiated outwards. Upon seeing this person, Yi Yun was slightly alarmed. In his battle with Zhulong had absorbed the blood of the gods, resulting in a flame-shaped scar that radiated outwards appearing in the middle of his eyebrows. It felt like his forehead was corroded from the blood of the gods. This person had also used the blood of the gods, meaning that he too was definitely a first-generation blood moon. And from his aura, it was far more powerful than Zhulong. It meant that he had reincarnated a long time ago. All these led Yi Yun to think of one person, Blood Moon's executive controller.
He's dead? Yi Yun was alarmed.
He never expected to see Blood Moon's executive controller's corpse here.
This corpse was clearly not fake.
Such a powerful body was definitely a peerless expert's. Trying to cheat him by killing an expert, whose strength was similar to Blood Moon's executive controller, was too great a cost.
And in the entire Tian Yuan world, there was probably no such person.
I believe you have already recognized who he is.
Indeed.
He is the Blood Moon Alliance leader.
He is already dead. Not only is he dead, even his henchmen are all dead.
Hence, you worrying about the remnants of Blood Moon causing a disaster is nothing but a joke. Shinto Patriarch said in a mocking tone, Yi Yun, I know what is on your mind.
What you are thinking is just imagination.
The Tian Yuan world has a threat lurking, the Blood Moon Alliance leader, and no one here present might be his match in strength. So we need to rely on you, allowing you to mature to resist the Blood Moon Alliance leader.
Then you will have no fear. Unfortunately, he is already dead.
Your plan has been dismantled.
Now, you are just a threat to us, not the savior of the world. Once you mature, you might even be worse than Blood Moon.
Chapter 674, Refusal.
Yi Yun was surprised with the Blood Moon Alliance leader's death.
He could not immediately figure out the oddity that pervaded the matter, but he was sure that this matter was not as simple as it seemed. And at this point, Yi Yun no longer had much time to think further. Shinto Patriarch was aggressive in forcing Yi Yun to sign the soul contract.
With a wave of his hand, the soul contract was put in front of Yi Yun.
It was a black desolate beast hide. There were complicated rune words carved on the beast hide, and there was a faint green flame swirling and burning around the desolate beast hide. With just one glance at this desolate beast hide and the rune words carved on it, Yi Yun knew that this soul contract must have cost the Tian Yuan Elder Consortium a great price to produce. The Tian Yuan Elder Consortium knew that Yi Yun and Lin Xintong's future achievements were limitless. If the soul contract was not powerful enough, it could not restrain the two of them.
What a good soul contract! Yi Yun sneered. This soul contract was jointly produced by top Tian Yuan world factions.
By using a mystic technique, a complete primordial true spirit's hide was refined and shrunk down. Various treasures produced the special ink to carve the runic words.
The entire process required the participation of various large family clans' legendary figures.
All of them were the cream of the crop, and they were also the members of the Elder Consortium.
One of them was Shinto Patriarch. The entire Elder Consortium only had one expensive soul contract. It was prepared for Yi Yun and Lin Xintong. The soul contracts signed by others were different.
They could not afford to use such a valuable contract. Yi Yun chuckled when he saw this soul contract. Back in the Heavenly Dao Union, Blood Moon had forced him to sign a soul contract. It was much less powerful than this soul contract. These people were really willing to sacrifice so much to produce it.
And if I choose not to sign? Yi Yun's voice turned cold.
Lin Xintong, who was beside him, also silently held her sword.
The atmosphere immediately turned tense. This soul contract does not have any restrictions on your freedom.
It is only to guarantee our safety.
Why do you not want to sign it? An elder, whose face was covered in tattoos, said with a hoarse voice.
He came from the Totem Mystic clan. This faction also did not have good relations with Yi Yun and the Lin family. What an interesting logic. So I must sign something that does not restrict my freedom? Do I live for you? Furthermore, signing a soul contract means binding a lock on my soul. A permanent soul contract especially is no trifling matter. So how can it be possible that it would not result in a shred of restraint on my soul? As Yi Yun stood up, Lin Shintong followed to stand alongside him. Typical warriors would be reluctant to sign a permanent soul contract. Having a permanent lock on their bodies, no matter how loose, would make them uncomfortable. Furthermore, it was unnecessary for Yi Yun to yield. The soul contract prevented members from attacking one another. In the future, Shinto Patriarch would have no fear. Even if he did something that provoked or disgusted Yi Yun would not be able to do anything with him. Yi Yun naturally would not accept such a condition. It looks like you don't plan on signing it. Li Fire Grandma shook her head, as if she was pitying Yi Yun. Yi Yun, you enjoyed success at a young age, so it is inevitable that you will have some pride. However, you need to know that something is easily broken if it's too rigid. I will not go into the pros and cons. You should know them yourself. You are right. I naturally know the pros and cons, which is why I'm not signing it. I personally hate signing soul contracts, especially permanent soul contracts. If not, there wouldn't be the battle at the Soul Tomb. Yi Yun ignored Li Fire Grandma's soft threat that had hidden agendas. He then looked at the other Tian Yuan Elder Consortium members. Do all of you have the same thoughts? A portion of elders present had the intentions to befriend Yi Yun and Lin Shintong. However, this befriending was due to the dread that they felt towards Yi Yun. They naturally knew that being friendly would not result in Yi Yun helping them in the future. All they hoped was that Yi Yun would not attack them in the future. If the soul contract was signed, it would be efficacious forever. Young Master Yi, your words are too harsh. I naturally stand on your side. However, signing the soul contract is a rule established by the Tian Yuan Elder Consortium. Although I have the intention to support you, I'm unable to prevent it. A rotund old man said with a laugh. This was a typical wishy-washy comment. He clearly did not want to offend both sides. All he wished was for people like Shinto Patriarch and Li Fire Grandma to fix Yi Yun. Young Master Yi, if you are unsatisfied with the conditions, it is still possible to. Someone added on. Yi Yun sneered. He pulled the pure yang broken sword out of his interspatial ring and nonchalantly sliced the negotiating table. Cha! Without using any strength, the stone table, made out of extreme frost black rock, was sliced into like tofu. My condition is very simple. I am not signing. When Yi Yun said those words, the atmosphere turned more solemn immediately. Amongst the Tian Yuan world elders, with the sovereign of the Eventide as head, many people began to emit killing auras. They had clearly lost their patience. The killing aura intensified and the entire venue was surging with energy like a tsunami. If a Dao Seed Realm warrior was standing here, just being hit by the killing aura would cause his organs to rupture and kill him. Shinto Patriarch narrowed his eyes as he looked at Yi Yun. He said solemnly, "Is that your answer? What a pity, for I'm afraid it's not up to you." Shinto Patriarch was the first to stand up. His killing intent had locked onto Yi Yun. Everyone says that Yi Yun has exceeded the martial realm of the Tian Yuan world, and he can easily leapfrog a full realm, or even a realm and a half. Some even say you would definitely become a peerless great emperor. Today, let me ascertain how true those rumors are. Shinto Patriarch's words denigrated Yi Yun. He did not doubt if the rumors were exaggerated, but he only said what was most believable. He was not looking down on Yi Yun, it was because he had absolute confidence in his strength. Yi Yun did not care about Shinto Patriarch's threats. You old thing, who has lived for 70 or 80,000 years, knows no shame by challenging me, a Yuan Opening Realm Junior. your age is thousands of times mine. Your cultivation level is also one full realm higher than mine. To think you have the face to ask me how truthful those rumors are. I'm really impressed by your degree of shamelessness. I'm not sure how my strength compares to yours, but in terms of shamelessness, I'm really left in your dust. Yun's curses were extremely biting. He had rained down curses on Shinto Patriarch, but what he said were all facts. Ignoring Shinto Patriarch, even many of the legendary figures sitting there felt ashamed for Shinto Patriarch. This battle was really disgraceful. Cut the nonsense. Since you are already so shameless, I'll take you on to the end. Whoever who wants to fight, feel free to come. The moment he finished speaking, he turned around and with a leap, he flew out of the gigantic pagoda's window. From the Greatsword Mountain peak that pierced the clouds, he followed the tall, hanging cliffs like a rock that had its wings fully spanned, and he flew towards the distant sea of clouds. Chapter 675, Battling Shinto Patriarch. After Yun flew out, Lin Shinton followed closely behind. Below the cliffs of Greatsword Mountain, a mist lingered, making it seem like an immortal's paradise. As the Yun and Lin Shinton shuttled through the mist in the form of black and white figures, they appeared like an immortal couple. As their figures disappeared, Shinto Patriarch's expression turned grim. That little bastard thinks he is invincible. Shinto Patriarch gritted his teeth. After having been repeatedly rejected and mocked by Yun, he was completely infuriated. He enjoyed being powerful all his life, so when had he ever suffered such indignity from a junior? Furthermore, Yun's attitude was one that completely dismissed him. Such insolence made Shinto Patriarch wish to skin Yun alive. So, Shinto Patriarch flew out of the gigantic pagoda, and the group of legendary figures followed behind him. They flew midair hundreds of thousands of feet high. As they looked far into the distance, there were fields, lakes, and rivers beneath them. It was extremely picturesque. Yun landed on a nameless mountain peak. The mountain was lush with vegetation, and the strange stones that littered the ground were like beasts, while the ancient pines resembled dragons. There was a waterfall that came crashing down from the mountain peak. It was like a white band of water that fell thousands of feet, with a tumultuous sound of water rushing. Yun stood on this lush green mountain, waiting for Shinto Patriarch. In less than 30 seconds, Shinto Patriarch landed on the mountain peak. As he scanned the scenery around him, he sneered. This sure is a beautiful place. Are you choosing this as your burial ground? Yun shook his head with a laugh. I'm still young, so don't you worry about me. As for you, you have lived for 70 or 80,000 years. Your end is nearing, so it's pertinent for you to choose a nice spot for your eternal, peaceful rest. Yun specially targeted people's weaknesses in his cursing. Lifespan was one of the biggest pains that those old freaks like Shinto Patriarch had. They indeed did not have much lifespan left. Courting death. Shinto Patriarch was incensed. His energy surged out, and before the Elder Consortium's legendary figures arrived, he was already planning on attacking Yun. Ka. The mountain peak beneath Shinto Patriarch began to tremble. A terrifying aura began to envelop the surroundings. The trees on the mountain were influenced by this energy, and they began to violently contort and twist. The large trees began to grow. Massive tree roots seemed to drill outwards from the ground like pythons. The entire forest seemed to enter a frenzy state. Shinto Patriarch clearly was proficient at wood elemental laws. It was considered a relatively rare law. And at this moment, the other legendary figures of the Elder Consortium had arrived. Realizing that the battle had already begun, they watched with anticipation. All of them were curious about Yun's strength. Yun. Beside Yun, Lin Shinton transmitted her voice. He understood what was on her mind and said, "Just stand by a corner and watch. Just beware of those old guys suddenly sneaking up on me. I alone am enough to deal with Shinto Patriarch. If Yi Yun and Lin Xintong combined forces, their strength was not as simple as addition.
All right.
Lin Xintong nodded. They both cultivated the Great Empress Heart Sutra. Furthermore, with her body being more suitable than Yi Yun for the cultivation of the Great Empress Heart Sutra, Lin Xintong was not weaker than Yi Yun. However, over these years, Lin Xintong only quietly followed behind Yi Yun. She seldom stood forward to say anything. Everything had Yi Yun as the center of the situations in her life. She would only attack if there was a necessity. Her character was like this. She had a warm and soft appearance that resembled water, but once she decided on something, she would pursue it single-mindedly.
As the mountains trembled, numerous gigantic trees shot up into the sky.
Even the 1,000-foot waterfall was enveloped by the rapidly growing tree branches. In a moment, the entire mountain peak was sealed in a sea of gigantic trees.
And a divine tree phantom image appeared behind Shinto Patriarch.
This divine tree was rooted to the ground, and its crown reached into the heavens.
Twang!
Shinto Patriarch moved, and with a cursory grab, he grabbed a long spear which appeared out of thin air. He then charged at Yi Yun. He was extremely fast, like a divine tiger pouncing through the woods. As he stabbed with his spear, a trembling buzz formed while he pierced through the air. And at this moment, Yi Yun was trapped in the gigantic tree enchantment.
The gigantic tree's branches sealed every direction, preventing Yi Yun from dodging.
With a flip of his hand, Yi Yun held the sun-shooting 9 death's bow.
With energy as arrows, a pure yang divine arrow went whistling forward. Phew! The arrow ignited a sea of fire behind it.
As the pure yang flames burned, it was as if a sun was crashing into the world.
Large tracts of trees were lit up. These gigantic trees, which were as solid as divine metal, could not resist the pure yang inferno. Boom! Shinto Patriarch's spear clashed with Yi Yun's arrow.
In the intense collision, it caused the ground to tremble. Numerous gigantic trees were uprooted as a result. They splintered midair before being burnt to a crisp by the pure yang flames.
Shinto Patriarch was alarmed.
He was forced to take a step back. Although he did not suffer from this clash, he was using a spear, while Yi Yun shot an energy arrow. A spear should have a large advantage against a flying projectile, but yet, he failed to gain anything from that. And at this moment, Yi Yun came charging with the pure yang broken sword in hand, swiping it straight at Shinto Patriarch's head. The sword beam seemed to tear away at a withered stump, and it seemed to crash down like an enormous waterfall. Instantly, whatever area the sword beam flashed past, all the gigantic trees would splinter.
Even the 1,000-foot waterfall far into the distance was sliced by the sword beam, cutting the water flow.
The gigantic tree enchantment had been forcefully torn apart. However, the sword beam did not lose any momentum, and it was already in front of Shinto Patriarch's eyes. At this moment, Shinto Patriarch had expended a lot of effort just to withstand Yi Yun's energy arrow. He felt horror when he saw the sword beam slash at him after the enchantment was broken. He had not gone easy during this battle. He knew Yi Yun's strength was extraordinary, but there was a gap in cultivation level. Furthermore, he believed that his insight into laws far exceeded Yi Yun. He wanted to bring Yi Yun to a standstill with one strike. He would then mortally wound Yi Yun with a speed that was like a sudden clap of thunder which left no time for one to cover one's ears. As long as he wounded Yi Yun, he would prove that Yi Yun's strength was not much. He was far from having matured. This way, he could combine forces with the few members of the Elder Consortium that were hostile to Yi Yun.
It would be much easier killing Yi Yun in that case.
However, he never expected that Yi Yun's bow and sword were so powerful. Now, with the sword beam about to reach him, Shinto Patriarch no longer had any other thoughts. With a bellow, he brought his spear in front of him, hoping to deflect the attack back to its source.
Ka-cha! A frightening explosion echoed as the battle turned the world upside down. The mountain peak that was littered with gigantic trees was forcefully sliced off. As millions of pounds of rock flew up, they shattered midair, turning to powder.
As a violent wind blew, the Pyryang inferno spread, forming a gray mist that shrouded the sky. And in this strong collision, Shinto Patriarch was sent flying backwards. He crashed heavily into a shaved cliff dozens of meters tall. Boom! Like a meteorite hitting land, the shaved cliff collapsed. Gravel of all sizes caved down and rolled all over. Crackle! The falling rocks exploded almost at the same instant. With a spear in his hand, Shinto Patriarch stood amidst the rock ruins. His hair was disheveled, and his face was stained with blood. His clothes were tattered in many spots. He was not seriously injured, but his appearance looked wretched. Shinto Patriarch emerged from the rubble, and at this moment, he was filled with rage and shock. He knew that Iyun was not easy to deal with, but he had never expected Iyun's strength to reach such a terrifying extent. Shinto Patriarch had enjoyed the ability to have nature at his beck and call all his life. He had never been humiliated in public in such a way. With extreme anger, he shook the spear in his hand as the divine tree behind him melded into his spear.
At that moment, Shinto Patriarch seemed to be fully integrated with the land beneath him.
He was like a tree that was rooted into the land. The entire mountain with its entire forest as well as all the flora in the surrounding region that spanned 1,000 miles seemed to establish an invisible connection with Shinto Patriarch. These plants absorbed heaven-earth yuan qi, and through the seismic network, they constantly provided energy which gathered in Shinto Patriarch's body. As an old freak that had lived for tens of thousands of years, Shinto Patriarch had some unique secret skills. It's the Creation Sutra that Old Man Shinto cultivates. It links the energy of all that is created and absorbs the yuan qi from them to augment himself. If it wasn't for him being at death's doorstep, Old Man Shinto would not use this move. Some of the legendary figures present knew Shinto Patriarch a long time ago, and they had seen Shinto Patriarch's best skills. With the use of Creation Sutra, it might allow him to take back some of the advantage that he lost. Shinto Patriarch, who was currently on the battleground, was in a wretched state. This battle's outcome was not something that many had anticipated. The people present all knew Shinto Patriarch's strength. Amongst the Heaven Ascension realm experts, Shinto Patriarch was definitely considered one of the stronger ones. However, his tree enchantment had failed to leave any impact on Iyun. Instead, his spear attack had been easily overcome by Iyun. This reflected the fact that amongst the Tian Yuan Elder Consortium members, more than 70% of them were not Iyun's match. They did not like such a conclusion. Even though they did not wish to enter a conflict with Iyun, they also wished that Shinto Patriarch would defeat Iyun, or at least, he should not lose too badly. If not, it would imply that they could do nothing to Iyun at this point in time. If Iyun was given some more time in the future, then no one would know how much his strength would grow. As the energy grew more intense, immense amounts of yuan qi flowed through the seismic network and condensed into a gigantic hand in front of Shinto Patriarch. The gigantic hand grabbed at Iyun. This hand had a vast and majestic aura, as if it was an embodiment of heavenly Tao. Against Shinto Patriarch's Creation Sutra strike, Iyun hovered 100 meters in the air. With the broken sword in hand, he gently reversed his blade. To Iyun, a battle with Shinto Patriarch was a process in which he could test his own strength. After breaking through to the Yuan opening realm, Iyun wanted to know how strong he had become. Ka-cha! Like a mighty explosion that thundered from heaven, the moment that the Pyryang broken sword was brandished, it swept up the worldly Pyryang energy. It resulted in whirlwinds sweeping through colorful immense clouds that were lit up by lightning. The Great Empress Heart Sutra cultivation technique surged in Iyun's body. Iyun seemed like a sun hanging in the sky. And with that, Iyun slashed his sword at Shinto Patriarch. The sword came slaying down, ripping through the fabric of space, as if it became the only thing in the world. As the heavens began to shatter, a sword beam seemed to break through the confines of space and time, coming from an ancient era. Everyone stared with widened eyes. Seeing the reverberations in the sky, this was definitely a top matchup in the entire Tian Yuan world. Shinto Patriarch, who was using his specialty attack, versus Yi Yun, who was bound to become a peerless great emperor. This strike was sufficient enough to decide the victor, and it could also tell the difference in their strength. The surrounding crowd, including Heaven Ascension Realm warriors, began to retreat in the face of such a collision. They also conjured their protective energies to withstand the shock wave. After all, an energy impact of such a degree would definitely result in a terrifying explosion. However, when the sword beam clashed with the gigantic heavenly Daohand, the explosion they were expecting did not happen. The stunning sword beam ripped through Shinto Patriarch's gigantic hand without stopping. Shi La. The gigantic hand that emitted a vast, ancient aura had been split into two from top to bottom. What? Everyone stared widely. The energy explosion that they thought would resemble the collision of stars did not happen. Instead, Shinto Patriarch's Creation Sutra had been wrecked. Yuan Qi surged wantonly as pure yang flames burned, engulfing the heavens and earth. The white clouds in a 1,000-mile radius dispersed, while the gigantic heavenly Daohand perished in the Inferno Sea. The sword beam did not lose momentum after tearing through the gigantic heavenly Daohand as it went straight for Shinto Patriarch's head. Shinto Patriarch's pupils constricted. He wanted to dodge this earth-shattering strike, but at that very instant, he felt his surroundings being pulled taut by an immense and terrifying energy. It was like a cage locking him in. There was no way for him to dodge. Shinto Patriarch bellowed and he put his spear in front of him to ward off Yi Yun's strike. As to how much he could ward off, or whether he would be killed immediately, it was all an unknown. Under such a situation, Yi Yun naturally did not go easy. Even though he needed allies to face Blood Moon together, against a person like Shinto Patriarch, he naturally would want to directly kill him if given the opportunity, to guard against future trouble. What insolence! At this moment, a roar echoed. From the legendary figures watching nearby, a tall black figure flew out. He held a large seal and threw it at Yi Yun's sword beam. This black figure was the sovereign of the Eventide. As the strongest person in the Tian Yuan world, he needed to protect Shinto Patriarch. If the older generation was all killed by Yi Yun, it would cause chaos. The seal was like a black mountain. As it disintegrated and suppressed the void, it slammed heavily onto Yi Yun's sword beam. Be it a seal or spear, they were considered to be heavy weapons, and against a sword, they had an advantage. However, when the seal slammed into the sword beam, the expected explosion of the sword beam did not happen. Instead, in the intense collision, the seal trembled as if it had hit an invisible spatial barrier. Furthermore, the sword beam accelerated downwards. Ka-cha! The sword had ripped open the land. The mountain peak that Yi Yun was standing on had now been split into two. A sword scar ran right from the mountain peak down its mountainsides, causing about a dozen gigantic ravines to open up. As for the sword scar, it extended all the way down, entering deep into the ground, opening up what could be hundreds of thousands of feet. As for Shinto Patriarch, he stood not far from the sword scar ravine. His clothes were torn and his hair disheveled. His face had an unusual paleness to it. He had been defeated, thoroughly defeated. He knew that he had just visited death's door. If it wasn't for the sovereign of the Eventide strike that shifted the sword beam at the very last moment, diminishing a portion of the impact, would he have died after being struck by the sword? It was unpredictable. Shinto Patriarch subconsciously tightened his grip on his spear, as he felt his palm turn cold. The taste of near death was something that he had never experienced in a very long time. He had almost forgotten what it felt like. And today, he had experienced it once again from Yi Yun, a junior who had cultivated for less than 30 years. Chapter 676, The Taste of Near Death. Chapter 677, The Awe of Strength. Seeing how his attack failed to have any outcome, Yi Yun frowned slightly. He indeed had the intent to kill, and if possible, he wanted to finish the old fool with that attack. However, the sovereign of the Eventide had stepped in, deflecting Yi Yun's sword. With sovereign of the Eventide in the way, killing Shinto Patriarch was difficult. Although Iyun did not fear the sovereign of the Eventide, if he were to attack him, it would be equivalent to making all the legendary figures in the Tianyuan world his enemy.
Those people would definitely not sit idle as Iyun killed each member of the Tianyuan Elder Consortium one by one.
Iyun also did not wish for Lin Shintong and himself to engage in a life-and-death battle with so many people.
Iyun, you sure are extraordinary. Sovereign of the Eventide looked at Iyun as his eyes sparkled.
When his seal smashed into Iyun's sword beam, it made him astonished at Iyun's strength despite the short moment of contact. A weapon like a seal's offensive methods were either suppressing or smashing.
It should have been easy for Sovereign of the Eventide to smash through a sword beam.
However, Iyun's sword beam seemed to thrive endlessly. It seemed like it had an immortal strength to it, making Sovereign of the Eventide think he had hit a divine mountain in his previous strike. Sovereign of the Eventide knew that for a sword beam to not shatter from such a smash, it was due to the sword intent augmenting the sword beam. The sword intent was too powerful, causing the sword beam to condense without dissipating. For Iyun to have such strength and swordplay made him apprehensive. Although Sovereign of the Eventide did not think that he was inferior to Iyun, he still lacked the absolute confidence that he could keep Iyun behind. Defeating an opponent and keeping an opponent behind were two completely different things. Furthermore, there was Lin Shintong not far away. Just thinking of him having to face the combined forces of Iyun and Lin Shintong gave Sovereign of the Eventide a headache. He was even somewhat afraid to face such a situation. The two of them were a Dao couple, so how could a couple like that not have any combined attack skills? As such, getting the group of them to force Iyun and Lin Shintong to sign a soul contract was already out of the question. Other than Sovereign of the Eventide, the others also become cognizant of this point. With Iyun not signing a soul contract, it was like a recumbent tiger by their sides, making them uneasy. Now, it was already unrealistic to shackle the tiger. The only method they had left was to fawn over the tiger, serving it meat, so that it would not attack them. Instantly, many people changed their minds. Those legendary figures, who had the intention to befriend Iyun, rushed forward at this moment to congratulate him. They flew into the air and surrounded Iyun. Young Master Yi is truly impressive. To battle the Heaven Ascension realm at the Yuan opening realm, that is crossing a full realm. In the future, when young Master Yi achieves Heaven Ascension, who knows what strength will be like? A middle-aged looking man said with a smile.
News of today's battle will quickly proliferate throughout the Tianyuan world. Beside the middle-aged looking man, an old man echoed.
I wonder when young Master Yi will have the time. I, Shui Yushan, have always had the intentions to visit the Lin family. If young Master Yi is free, I will get my disciples to prepare some small gifts.
A group of people gave their compliments. Of course, it was unknown how many of them had genuine feelings.
Iyun did not take those compliments at heart. He knew very clearly that without the great power he possessed today, these group of people would have gnawed at him, leaving not a single bone left. The great Empress heritage would be robbed from his corpse. These old fools could even begin fighting each other just for the great Empress heritage. Iyun did not care much for their sweet words that had swords hidden in them. He gave a few perfunctory responses, and instead, the more fawning a person was, the more he was wary of that person. This sort of person was most likely to strike a man when he was done. After the short exchange, Iyun suddenly turned his head and looked at the sanctuary couple not far away. From the moment Iyun came to the Tianyuan Elder Consortium, the couple had not indicated their stand. They were not overly passionate towards Iyun, nor did they appear hostile. Iyun had good feelings towards the couple. He cupped his hands at the sanctuary couple's male. Island Lord, this lowly one has a few questions, and is hoping that the Island Lord would answer.
Oh?
The sanctuary Island Lord was slightly surprised. He smiled and said, "Little brothery, go ahead and speak."
It's this lowly one wants to ask where did the Island Lord find the 10 blood moon corpses?
The island lord naturally had the greatest authority regarding the 10 blood moon corpses. He said, "The sanctuary island I reside in is deep in the untraversable sea. One day, I sensed a heaven-earth energy fluctuation far off. It even resulted in strange worldly phenomena, as if some law was being shattered. I thought a treasure had appeared, so I went searching with my wife. What we found was a major scene of destruction. The red color in the entire untraversable sea in a radius of 10,000 miles had disappeared, turning a deep blue. There were remnants of energy flow and laws in the air. This was likely due to a large explosion prior. If I am not wrong, there was likely some form of a formation array set up there previously. Unfortunately, the formation array failed for some reason and it directly collapsed, causing the change in the heaven and earth laws. I searched the vicinity for traces of the explosion and I discovered the 10 blood moon corpses. Some of the corpses were no longer whole. I originally suspected that these people had set up a formation array to reincarnate en masse, but I could sense the traces of soul fragments from the corpses, so it apparently didn't resemble reincarnation. I was not sure if all of them could not reincarnate, but I was sure that a large number of them were truly dead. I believe this has lowered the threat of blood moon to its minimum. A formation array's explosion? Yi Yun frowned slightly. He found it hard to believe this explanation. It was not only Yi Yun. The other Tian Yuan world's elders also felt that something was amiss in the situation. However, the facts were before them, and indeed, there were 10 dead reincarnators. It was impossible to say that they had faked their deaths as the corpses were in the sanctuary couple's hands. The Tian Yuan Elder Consortium had even constructed 10 soul-sealing coffins to seal the corpses in them. They believed that it was impossible for the reincarnators to be resurrected under such a situation. Furthermore, they knew that in the Soul Tomb's Blackstone trials, the core of Blood Moon, the strongest Inspector army, had been completely destroyed. This was undoubtedly a major blow to Blackstone trials. With a spate of setbacks, it was hard to imagine that the remnants of Blood Moon could stage a comeback. Why? Does little brother E think there's a problem? The white-dressed female of the sanctuary couple asked. She was an extremely beautiful young woman, and her voice had a cheery tone. It was an extremely pleasing voice. Blood Moon is not that easily destroyed, Yi Yun said with certainty. Oh? What is the reason? I don't know, it's just a feeling. Yi Yun knew Blood Moon's history more than anyone present. He also understood the horrifying effects of that ancient great war more than them. He indeed lacked the evidence, and everything was just his hunch. Chapter 678, Threat. Feeling? When the man from Sanctuary heard Yi Yun say that, he smiled. Something just from feeling alone did not sound reliable, but to warriors, feelings were not something that they should brush away. Many warriors had fated luck augmenting them. Sometimes, due to the fated luck, they would enjoy a blessing of the mind, allowing them to make the best choice at critical moments. There is reason for little brother E to be worried, but we do have our precautions as well. These 10 corpses have already been sealed in soul-sealing coffins by me. I have set up various arrays and I used a realm stone to suppress them. So even if they have extraordinary abilities, it is impossible for them to be revived. And in a few days, if my research comes to naught, I will destroy the corpses so as to prevent any future trouble. After he collected the 10 corpses, he too found the matter amiss. He wanted to figure out how the 10 Blood Moon members died through their corpses. After Yi Yun heard his words, he slightly faltered and said, "The matter is not so simple. That will be all that I shall say. Everyone, please be careful and all the best." Yi Yun also knew that it was pointless saying anything else in this situation. He bade them farewell immediately. Hand in hand, Yi Yun and Lin Xintong left as their figures flashed away nearly instantly in the azure sky. After watching Yi Yun and Lin Xintong leave, Sovereign of the Eventide's eyes flashed. At this moment, he was not considering the threat of Blood Moon, but the threat that came from Yi Yun. Blood Moon looked like it had suffered a serious setback and it might have already been completely destroyed. However, the threat from Yi Yun was very real. In less than 10 years, he would have the ability to dominate the entire Tian Yuan world. All of their lives would then be held in Yi Yun's hands. At this moment, Shintu Patriarch, who was stained with blood, flew into the crowd. When Yi Yun was around, he was too humiliated to show his face. Now that Yi Yun had left, he could no longer suppress his feelings. You can laugh all you want about the insult that I experienced today, but I want to give a word of caution. Yi Yun's rise is already unstoppable. Those who have old grudges with him don't think optimistically. Everyone has already seen it. When I was battling him, his final strike was clearly trying to take my life. If it wasn't for Sovereign of the Eventide saving me, I would have lost my life. This is my advice. Shintu Patriarch said hatefully. When everyone heard it, they did not speak a word. All of them had indeed felt the killing intent in Yi Yun's final attack. It was a strike that did not hold back. Shintu Patriarch's gaze scanned them as he said solemnly, "Everyone, don't think that he just has the intent to kill me, and has no intentions towards you. Many amongst you had offended the Lin family and Yi Yun back then. To seek revenge on that useless grandson of mine, Shintu Nantian, he hid his identity in front of Nantian and he did not expose any of his hatred. From this, you can tell what sort of personality he has. After that, with strength so much inferior to Nantian, he tortured Nantian terribly step by step. The Lin family throwing Nantian into the dungeons was also his work. Finally, in the great Empress Mystic Realm, he finally killed Nantian. How can you not be afraid of such a person? He might not be doing anything to you now, but in the future. That will be hard to tell." Shintu Patriarch knew that he had thoroughly offended Yi Yun. If he tried empathizing, he too would want to uproot any potential trouble and kill himself if he was Yi Yun. That was human nature. Those who did not have many grudges with Yi Yun were still hoping to engage in self-preservation or even befriend Yi Yun. Shintu Patriarch would not sit idle as he waited for Yi Yun to murder him. Upon hearing Shintu Patriarch's words, many people revealed a look of dread. All of them had an idea of what Yi Yun did to Shintu Nantian. It was indeed quite scary. Back when Shintu Nantian wanted to put Yi Yun to death in the Chu Prefecture city, Yi Yun was like an ant-like figure to Shintu Nantian. Who knew that in a few years, Shintu Nantian would end up dying under the hands of Yi Yun? Towards such a Yi Yun, trying to curry favor with him could not put them at ease. The best method was of course to kill him. However, Yi Yun was too powerful. Shintu Patriarch nearly died under his hands, and Sovereign of the Eventide also failed to befriend him. They wanted to kill Yi Yun, and probably by only setting up a formation array beforehand, and gathering the forces of many elders would they be able to stop Yi Yun from escaping. But even so, it might succeed. And if their assault on Yi Yun failed, the outcome would be unthinkable. How could Shintu Patriarch not know what was on their minds? He sneered and said, "All of you are trying to play it safe. When you get hunted one by one, it will be too late to regret." After finishing, Shintu Patriarch flicked his sleeves then left. He did not plan on leaving Greatsword Mountain so as to prevent Yi Yun from attacking him. He wanted to enter reclusion to heal his wounds. Regardless of how overbearing Yi Yun was, he would not attack Greatsword Mountain, or it would mean that he was truly challenging the entire Tian Yuan Elder Consortium. As for those elders, he did not believe that they would play it safe all the way. Yi Yun was constantly growing and the threat to them was getting bigger. They would eventually break. After a few elders heard Shintu Patriarch's words, they exchanged glances and said, "Let's gather again in a few days." They needed time to consider. Yi Yun's threat was great, but to lose decorum with Yi Yun was too risky. If Yi Yun began to seek revenge on those family clans, it would not be too late for them to make a decision then. And those family clans who could receive retaliation, such as the Totem Mystic race, they really could not sit still. Shintu Patriarch is right. We have to get rid of Yi Yun as soon as possible. He refused to sign the soul contract this time, revealing his ambition. The family clans that were worried about being retaliated upon had decided on privately convincing the family clans that had cordial relationships with them. They might as well ally with other elders rather than sit idly waiting for death. There was a possibility of successfully killing Yi Yun, and if they waited till Yi Yun was completely invincible, they would only be sheep for the slaughter.
On Greatsword Mountain, the family clan's elders left one by one, with various thoughts on their minds.
And 10,000 miles away. Yi Yun, what do you think Blood Moon is trying to do? Lin Xintong asked. I don't know. Yi Yun shook his head. He too was puzzled. Lin Xintong said, regardless of what Blood Moon wants to do, we need to upgrade our strength as fast as possible. Other than Blood Moon, we need to watch out for those family clans. These people are most volatile. Even if your strength has temporarily awed them, it would actually mean that you are a great threat to them. They will probably not feel at ease if they do not get rid of us. These people won't be able to stir up a storm. Yi Yun said nonchalantly. He did not think anything of people like Shintu Patriarch. They might have some combative power if they combine forces, but Yi Yun would not give them the opportunity to combine forces to kill him. And those people were all scheming people, so how could they truly cooperate fully? Yi Yun, let's return to the God Advent Tower and carry on cultivating. Lin Xintong said with a smile. She was holding hands with Yi Yun, and a warmth came from Yi Yun's palm. The two of them flew towards the untraversable sea hand in hand. In a blink of an eye, a few months had passed since the gathering at Greatsword Mountain. And during this period, the news of Yi Yun rejecting an elder spot at Greatsword Mountain, refusing to sign a soul contract, and defeating Shintu Patriarch had proliferated throughout the Tian Yuan world. The warriors who learned of this news still remembered the warrant from back then. Once upon a time, Yi Yun and Lin Xintong had been identified as human race traitors, accused by all, and hated by everyone. Many young warriors had fantasized of finding traces of Yi Yun and Lin Xintong to provide to the Martial Alliance to gain merit. Unexpectedly, in a blink of an eye, the Martial Alliance became the conspirator lurking in the Tian Yuan world, and Yi Yun had become the hero who destroyed Blood Moon's plans. He had even battled Shintu Patriarch without losing. Such a battle outcome was amazing. Towards a matter that sounded like an ancient legend, many young geniuses were completely envious about it, some even felt excited about it. Martial arts practitioners pursued a pleasurable life just like what Yi Yun was experiencing. In the Tian Yuan world, numerous youths began to set Yi Yun as their goal. Even though the seniors of various large factions purposely played down the matter, averting the promotion of Yi Yun. Slowly, Yi Yun became an idol in the hearts of the Tian Yuan world's younger generation. He was the embodiment of absolute power. Who didn't want to be like Yi Yun, having great accomplishments at a young age? Of course, in such a situation, the most ashamed entity was the Shintu family clan. On Greatsword Mountain, Shintu Patriarch could even hear people discuss Yi Yun, and the content sounded extremely harsh on his ears. I can't wait any further. If I wait any longer, I will truly have no chance to survive. Yi Yun will definitely kill me. Shintu Patriarch knew that Yi Yun was not some benevolent saint very clearly. He was firm and resolute in his killing. How could he endure a potential threat? In a warrior's life, no one could guarantee that their lives would be smooth sailing. They had to constantly maintain their peak conditions. For example, Yi Yun may be strong, but he would still experience injuries or feel weak after breaking out of reclusive training. Yi Yun would not allow a venomous snake to lurk around him as it could bite at him at any time. The smart choice was to completely eradicate potential threats. As time passed, slowly, Shintu Patriarch constantly contacted elders of other factions to come to Greatsword Mountain. He then began to discuss with these people in Greatsword Mountain's large formation array. Shintu family clans sent many confidants to the family clans that had old grudges with Yi Yun. They constantly roped in allies and looked for help. They already planned on setting up a large formation array at Greatsword Mountain to lure Yi Yun into a trap. On this matter, Sovereign of the Eventide also took an attitude of silent acquiescence. He had even secretly provided help and benefits for this array. To Sovereign of the Eventide, Shinto Patriarch and company were like a knife in his hand. If they failed, it did not matter if his knife broke. He would not be involved. Soon, Shinto Patriarch managed to gather 10 Heaven Ascension Realm legendary figures. Their factions all had offended Yi Yun before. Even these people had their concerns, and they could not force themselves to risk their lives to fight Yi Yun. The root of the problem was because of the success rate. They really did not have much chance of success. The 10 legendary figures gathered at Greatsword Mountain. This was temporarily the safest place. At least they did not need to worry about being assassinated by Yi Yun. As things dragged on, a few months passed. Shinto Patriarch knew deeply that with each passing month, Yi Yun's strength would constantly grow. He was a bit worried, but it seemed like Yi Yun and Lin Shintong had disappeared once again. They were not in the Lin family, and their whereabouts were unknown. As time dragged on, the more they lacked in confidence. These days, Shinto Patriarch felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. He felt like being in Greatsword Mountain was like being imprisoned. If he could not kill Yi Yun, he could only wait to face the gallows. Sooner or later, Yi Yun would have the adequate strength that could defy all the rules. When that happened, he would personally attack Greatsword Mountain and take his life. And this period of time would definitely not exceed a decade. It was very hard to accept, knowing when his death was coming. As he was tortured by his upcoming death, Shinto Patriarch even thought of taking the initiative to attack the Lin family so as to provoke Yi Yun, forcing him to attack Greatsword Mountain. However, even if Shinto Patriarch felt that such a crazy idea was doable, the others did not have the courage. It really had the feeling of moths charging into the fire. On this day, Shinto Patriarch was in a cultivation chamber trying to mull over profound techniques. He knew that in a head-on fight with Yi Yun, the chances of winning were slim. He could only use a mystic technique that overdraft his body's potential to bridge the difference in strength. The ancient heritage left behind by Blood Moon had no lack of such mystic techniques. Usually they were skills that damaged the enemy and dealt almost the same damage to oneself. However, these were like timely gifts for Shinto Patriarch. Just as Shinto Patriarch was entering reclusion to mull over the profound techniques, he suddenly felt his eyelids twitch. Following that, he had an inexplicable sense of anxiety. When the eyelids of mortals twitched, it was due to a physical reflex, but to warriors, it was not the same. When their eyelids twitched, either it was when luck came or the premonition of danger. What's the matter? Shinto Patriarch's heart skipped a beat as he immediately stood up and quickly exited the cultivation chamber. At this moment, on Greatsword Mountain, there were a few of Shinto Patriarch's allies. The other Tian Yuan Elder Consortium members had mostly returned to their own factions. The few people still on Greatsword Mountain sensed something amiss and they gathered in the square in front of the Elder Consortium's gigantic pagoda. On the square, they felt a surge of strong wind as the surrounding Heaven-Earth Yuan Qi turned turbulent. This scene made them worry. What was happening? The wind on the peak of Greatsword Mountain was definitely not naturally formed, it was conjured by energy. It blew at their faces like knives, giving them no choice but to conjure their protective Yuan Qi. A faint killing intent emanated through the air as Shinto Patriarch's expression turned increasingly solemn. He had a strong sense of unease. Yi Yun? Was he here to kill him? Shinto Patriarch found it hard to believe. It was unlikely that Yi Yun would be this arrogant. Although he was strong, he had not fully matured. If he were to attack Greatsword Mountain, it was publicly attacking the Tian Yuan Elder Consortium's members. It was equivalent to being an enemy of the entire Tian Yuan world. It was unlikely that Yi Yun had the power to dominate the Tian Yuan world, and if he angered all the large factions, they could combine forces and kill him at all costs. Then, there would probably be no place for him in the Tian Yuan world.
Who is it?
Shintu Patriarch held his spear in hand and began to form a battle formation with the other elders. At this moment, it was already dusk. The sun in the western sky emitted a faint golden glow, illuminating Shintu Patriarch's face. Even his spear was basking in this layer of golden light. Very suddenly, Shintu Patriarch saw a blood-red color appear in the horizon. He was certain that it was not a cloud dyed crimson by the setting sun. The blood-red color slowly spread out and emanated towards Greatsword Mountain constantly. It seemed to increase in density, and it was shocking to the senses.
From the blood-red color, Shintu Patriarch could sense an intense murderous intent from it.
It was as like a sea of blood that had slaughtered millions of lives. Drops of sweat began to fall from Shintu Patriarch's forehead.
It did not seem like Yi Yun, then who or what was it? Informed sovereign of the Eventide. Shintu Patriarch turned more and more anxious.
He had never felt such a feeling before. Beside him, a few legendary figures already felt that this matter was of great importance. They took out their voice transmission jade slips, but at this moment, Shintu Patriarch suddenly leaped up like a cat that had its tail stepped on.
He turned back.
At that very instant, he had sensed a terrifying killing intent behind him, as if a primordial behemoth had appeared behind him. The other legendary figures also followed Shintu Patriarch in turning back, and then they suddenly froze. This was because the terrifying aura and fear pervading their bodies made it hard for them to move. They saw, on the tip of the gigantic pagoda they just came out from, a monster dressed in black armor standing there.
It was unknown if he was man or ghost.
He wore a tattered cape behind him that fluttered with the wind. His arms were as long as a human's body, reaching down to the top of the pagoda.
This monster had only one bloodshot eye.
As the single eye stared at them, it made their hearts nearly stop.
They could sense a tremendous aura coming from this monster.
It was not due to awe or from his forceful stance. It was like a hare facing an eagle in the sky. It was a level of suppression that came from the difference in life's natural order. This suppression made their blood and energy almost impossible to flow.
What sort of thing is he?
Chapter 679, The Demon God in the Sunset.
Chapter 680, Greatsword Mountain Dyed Red.
Shintu Patriarch and the other legendary figures had not experienced such a feeling in a long time. Even when they first came into contact with martial arts, the feeling of facing a desolate beast hundreds of times more powerful than them paled in comparison to what they were feeling now. The black-armored monster stared at them in silence. No feelings could be seen from his only eye, only indifference. The way he looked at them was as if he was looking at a bunch of ants. As the strong winds howled, his black hair fluttered behind his head. The blood-red color in the distance seemed to sweep over like the tides, meeting the monster's body. On the peak of Greatsword Mountain, it formed a gigantic vortex. Shintu Patriarch and company seemed to see destruction caused from the eyes of the monster. It was a bloody crimson color, 100 times more intense than the blood cloud.
Thump! Thump! Thump!
As intense as violent drum beats, their heartbeats echoed in Shintu Patriarch and company's ears. It was as if their hearts were about to leap out from their throats.
Who the hell are you?
Shintu Patriarch's voice trembled as he slowly crushed the voice transmission jade slip, and at this moment, his pupils suddenly constricted.
The monster had disappeared from the tip of the pagoda.
The empty pagoda tip made everyone feel their scalps tingle.
These legendary figures immediately conjured their protective Yuan Qi.
With the fluctuation of Yuan Qi, the flashes of their protective Yuan Qi lit up.
Pooh!
A red beam appeared, and a long, spear-like hand suddenly appeared through a legendary figure's chest. This Heaven Ascension Realm Elder's mouth opened slightly as he stared widely. He slowly lowered his head in disbelief, looking at his chest. On the end of the hand were dark claws, fingertips stained with blood and flesh, dripping incessantly to the ground. His protective Yuan Qi had torn away like paper, not putting up a single bit of resistance. Bam! As the hand was retracted, blood sprayed through the air. This legendary figure was thrown outwards like a gunny sack, falling to the ground, fate unknown.
The other legendary figures looked at the monster with their faces pale.
With the monster standing in front of them, it was more than 10 feet taller than them. His exterior appearance was that of a human, but it felt like there was completely no humanity in him.
His strike did not result in any yuan qi fluctuation.
It was a simple attack, primal in nature, yet it had killed a legendary figure so simply. This monster slowly walked over to another legendary figure, whose hands turned clammy. He felt like the air and space itself were being compressed, making him unable to move.
"Help me!"
he shouted as his yuan qi exploded, sword serving as a conduit while energy gathered on his sword tip.
A tremendously powerful strike seemed to instantly turn daylight into night.
And in the darkness, this life-yearning strike slashed at the monster like Armageddon, causing meteorites crashing downwards. The monster did not dodge and it watched as the sword stabbed at his chest.
Boom!
When the sword beam struck the monster's body, his tall figure was instantly enveloped by the sword beam. But at this moment, a hand stained with warm blood reached out of the sword beam, grabbing hold of the legendary figure's neck.
Dang!
The legendary figure's sword fell to the ground as his legs were lifted off from the ground, legs constantly kicking in a struggle. Shinto Patriarch and company watched in horror at this scene as the legendary figure appeared as powerless as a baby in front of the monster. Finally, with a simple clench of the monster's 5 fingers, the sound of spine-tingling cracks were heard.
Pwah!
Blood sprayed out of the legendary figure's mouth, and in the mist of blood, his head slumped down in an odd, disjointed manner, body convulsing. His neck had been forcefully twisted off. The monster turned back indifferently to look at the rest.
"We will fight it out with you,"
Shinto Patriarch bellowed. There was no room for escape in front of the monster. The only thing they could do was give their all. Various energy beams shot out. Even the incomplete array, which was meant for Yi Yun, was activated by Shinto Patriarch. Despite such an earth-shattering offensive, there was not a single trace of yuan qi fluctuation coming from the monster.
His methods of killing were like squishing ants to death, extremely simple and direct. Legends fell one after another.
In their eyes, one could see terror, disgruntlement, and despair. They had been cultivating in martial arts for tens of thousands of years, standing at the peak of the Tian Yuan world, their every move affecting billions of lives.
They were existences all warriors coveted. Yet in front of such a monster, they felt like they were ordinary warriors facing themselves. The difference was too great. Despite giving their all in their offense, it was to no avail. The monster's expression did not change one bit.
Pa! A broken spear fell to the ground. It had been split apart by the monster, and beside the spear was a crushed voice transmission jade slip. Shinto Patriarch opened his mouth wide, grabbing his torn-apart chest while staring deadly at the monster. The monster was in heavy armor, with a tattered cape behind him. His muscles were taut and hard like divine metal. He had one red eye, while in his other eye socket, it looked like a stone, as if he was blind. His facial features were hidden in the shadows of his helmet. It was all a blur, preventing anyone from seeing clearly. At this moment, a shadow appeared over Shinto Patriarch's head. A large black foot came crashing down, and like a piece of straw, Shinto Patriarch was trampled by this foot, his sternum shattering.
Gotcha!
The entire square began to crack apart with his single stomp, cracks spreading out like numerous cobwebs. Shinto Patriarch stared widely at the sky. His eyes lost focus as he could no longer breathe. A pool of blood slowly gathered beneath that barefooted foot. The rumbling of Greatsword Mountain and the turbulent yuan qi that resulted from the intense battle on the mountain peak alarmed many major factions' disciples stationed at Greatsword Mountain. They usually did not scale Greatsword Mountain's peak, but now, even the defensive arrays around Greatsword Mountain's pagoda had been shattered by the monster's single stomp. These disciples still were unaware of what had happened as they rushed over, looking at the peak. Many elite disciples were gathered at Great Sword Mountain, especially the Shinto family clan, Li Fire sect, etc. As they were afraid of Yi Yun's retaliation, many of the family's geniuses took up residence at Great Sword Mountain. People looked up at the tall pagoda and watched the blood cloud that hung over their heads. They saw a figure beneath the cloud. He was like a savage dressed in heavy armor, with tattered clothes underneath. The savage was looking down, as if he was stepping on something. And when they managed to discern the thing that he was stepping on, the young elites present, especially the Shinto family clan's disciples, felt a jolt through their bodies. That person's face was covered in blood. His facial features were completely twisted, while his body convulsed. Yet, they managed to recognize that it belonged to Shinto Patriarch. A patriarch, one of the strongest figures in the Tian Yuan world, had been trampled to death by a savage? A cold feeling rose up from their feet. At this moment, the savage slowly looked up. A heartless single eye looked at this bunch of youths. At that instant, everyone felt like their lives no longer belonged to them.